Chapter 200, Killing Amidst the Night Rain. As the 5 sects and 2 clans appeared outside the Song clan mountains, Meng Hao shot upward inside the cloud vortex. All eyes watched as he pressed his good luck charm, pouring cultivation base power into it. Having begun preparation earlier, the instant he poured spiritual energy in, an enormous black hole appeared in the sky. All the chosen and nascent soul eccentrics saw it. The swirling vortex became a gaping mouth that swallowed Meng Hao instantly. The chosen below watched in shock. The nascent soul cultivators could only watch as he disappeared. How could they have predicted this? Seeing Meng Hao disappear, the nascent soul cultivators couldn't maintain calm. Almost simultaneously, they shot to their feet and flew toward the cloud vortex. Patriarch Song Tian sighed inwardly. He'd had no choice but to speak as he did. But even Song clan territory couldn't stand against all 5 sects and 2 clans. Meng Hao's own escape was for the best. At the moment, Song Tian couldn't really prevent the nascent soul cultivators from attempting to pursue Meng Hao. However, moments later, unsightly expressions appeared on their faces. They could clearly see that Meng Hao had used some sort of powerful magic to teleport away. It turns out a trifling foundation establishment cultivator like him has a precious teleportation treasure. What other mysteries is this Meng Hao hiding? The sublime spirit scripture, a precious teleportation treasure. The Violet Fate sect will definitely get our hands on him. The nascent soul cultivators returned, and the representatives of the 5 sects and 2 clans approached. Meng Hao's good luck charm teleported him away. Meanwhile, in the Black Sieve sect, in the central mountain of the 100,000 mountains, smoke curled above a massive incense burner. Dozens of cultivators shot up and disappeared into the smoke. Below, Patriarch Violet Sieve and the beautiful middle-aged woman watched grimly as the cultivators vanished. Patriarch Violet Sieve frowned. He's using that good luck charm, making him difficult to track. If we dispatch core formation disciples or artifacts, the tri-black incense burner would be disrupted, making it hard to pinpoint the teleportation ripples. The slightest mistake means hundreds of kilometers off. Furthermore, it can only be used once per month. Doesn't matter, replied the woman coolly. We may not use core formation disciples, but Zhou Jai won. Zhou Jai's name in Chinese is Chinese letters Zhu Jie. Zhou is a common family name. Jai means outstanding or heroic, is among the foundation establishment disciples we sent. With his cultivation base and Dao Child status, he can distract Meng Hao. He only needs to keep him in place. Others can prepare the spell and will be there in an instant. At that time, Meng Hao couldn't escape even with wings. Don't forget, we don't know how many times he can use the charm. If complete, he could use it 7 times total. He watched as the last disciples vanished into the smoke. Don't worry, replied the woman, smiling. Meng Hao is only mid-foundation establishment. Based on ancient records, I calculated that activating the charm takes 2 incense sticks worth of time. As long as Zhou Jai holds him off and we prepare the spell, Meng Hao is doomed. He's just a trifling foundation establishment cultivator. Don't worry. After that time, we'll be there. As they talked, somewhere in the southern domain, in a mountain range filled with hundreds of peaks, dark clouds filled the sky and lightning crashed. Roaring filled the air, causing wild beasts to tremble, awed by the heavens. Bean-sized drops of rain poured down in torrents. Though sunset, the sun was covered by clouds, making everything dark and hazy. Lightning slashed through the sky. Ripples expanded, splitting the rain sheets. A massive black hole appeared and Meng Hao staggered out pale. He immediately looked around. The hole disappeared and rain fell on him. He didn't seem to notice as he examined his surroundings. Finally, he sighed with relief. A cracking sound came from his hand. He looked down and saw another large fissure on the charm. He could only use it a few more times before it shattered. This is a life-saving treasure, he thought. I can't use it lightly. He hesitated, then took a deep breath. His body vibrated. Rainwater shot away and his clothes dried. Right now, all the sects and clans are looking for me. He frowned. The golden glow of the sublime spirit scripture was unexpected. He'd had no choice but to flee. Thankfully, I got the cubic pearl. I wonder if it will dispel the resurrection lily's poison. His eyes glowed as he decided to find a quiet mountain place, carve an immortal's cave, and test it. He took a step when suddenly his expression flickered. The place where the black hole appeared had returned to normal, yet suddenly another hole opened. It was pitch black, emanating rippling power that drove rain away. Killing intent flickered in Meng Hao's eyes. He could flee. The vortex was clearly someone tracking his teleportation ripples, but he didn't. A cold, determined light appeared in his eyes. He could flee for a few breaths but instead decided to stay and attack. As the thought formed, he strode forward. He waved his hand, and an enormous wind blade and flame dragon appeared, shooting toward the black hole and slamming into it. As the flame dragon slammed into the hole, a booming sound filled the air. The hole began to fall apart. Shadows of dozens of cultivators appeared, coalescing as if to emerge. Without hesitating, Meng Hao lifted his hand and bit his finger. The blood finger technique descended on the weakened hole. Boom! The massive sound drowned out thunder. The hole shook and exploded. No screams, but of the dozens of cultivators about to emerge, only half made it out alive. The other half were wiped out with the hole's destruction. Bloodless killing, only possible because of Meng Hao's decisiveness. Had he hesitated or fled, he'd face double the current enemies. The dozen who appeared immediately erupted with late Foundation establishment power. Among them was a tall, slender, handsome man with long dark hair, thin lips, and a strange glow in his eyes. His cultivation base was at Foundation establishment's Great Circle, pseudo-core stage. Black Civ Sect. Meng Hao's eyes narrowed as he recognized their garments instantly. His killing intent climbed higher. Now everything made sense. He didn't say another word. From this moment he would attack with decisiveness and no hesitation. He stepped forward, his 5 perfect Tao pillars rotating without leaking power. Raindrops vibrated as he approached the nearest Black Civ Sect cultivator. The man gave a cold snort. He lifted his hand, and an illusory hand appeared, shooting toward Meng Hao. Without a word, the other cultivators also charged at Meng Hao. Only the pseudo-core stage cultivator didn't move. Off to the side, he slapped his bag of holding and produced a hand-sized incense burner. He rubbed it, igniting it. Smoke rose, congealing into concentric rings of magical symbols, a teleportation portal. As the portal appeared, Meng Hao closed in on the Black Civ Sect cultivator who'd summoned the hand. The cultivator smiled ferociously. To him, this was simple. A late Foundation establishment stage cultivator could easily deal with a mid-stage one. Wiping him out would be easy. "I shall get credit for this," he said, laughing. He shot forward, glowing spikes emerging from his shoulders. He clearly planned to slam them into Meng Hao. Meng Hao's expression didn't change. He lifted his hand and pressed his finger into the approaching hand. It immediately disintegrated into shards. Zai stared in shock as Meng Hao closed in. Meng Hao didn't even look at him. The power he'd been concealing suddenly exploded out. Boom! Pressure billowed out and he was directly in front of the cultivator. His hand shot out and clasped the man's neck. Eyes cold, he squeezed. A cracking sound echoed, and the cultivator's eyes bulged in death. This was killing amidst the night rain. Chapter 201, The Tao Child Fights. This could also be considered bloodless killing, because any shed blood was instantly cleansed by the pouring rain. The rain's cleansing nature pleased him. He didn't waste power from his cultivation base repelling it. He slowly released his hand and then turned. Rainwater poured off of his chin and hair, soaking his clothes. Lightning flashed in the darkness of night, and Meng Hao suddenly seemed to emanate a demonic aura. The surrounding disciples were shocked, no longer contemptuous but concentrated. The Black Civ Sect Tao Child Jai looked at Meng Hao with narrowed eyes. He didn't attack, though, but continued to hold aloft the incense burner. Smoke curled up from it and was rapidly coalescing in midair. "Kill this person at any cost," he said, his cold voice ringing out in the dark, stormy night. There were more than 10 cultivators surrounding Meng Hao. Hearing the words of the Tao Child, they immediately prepared to attack. Magical techniques and treasured weapons of all sorts instantly bore down on Meng Hao. Booming sounds filled the air. This would be the most intense battle Meng Hao had ever faced. Each and every one of these cultivators was of the late Foundation establishment stage. As a matter of fact, a small sect wouldn't even be able to produce so many cultivators of this level. A medium-sized sect, even if they had so many, would never dispatch them all simultaneously. To any sect, disciples of the late Foundation establishment stage were good fortune from the heavens. If even one from a group this size could reach core formation, he would be crucially important to the sect. Only a super sect like the Black Civ Sect had such extensive resources to be able to afford to dispatch so many late Foundation establishment cultivators. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. If he had not created his 5th Tao pillar, then this battle would be extremely difficult and potentially fatal. But now, with his 5th Tao pillar, he was invincible to the battle power of the Foundation establishment stage. Actually, you could say that currently, Meng Hao was the most powerful person under the core formation stage in the entire southern domain. He laughed coldly as they approached, his left hand grasping at the air. Immediately, the flame dragon appeared as the flying rain dragon. It didn't completely appear, however. Meng Hao simply borrowed some of its heat to transform the surrounding sheets of rainwater into a thick mist. As the mist rolled about, Meng Hao slapped his bag of holding, and the two wooden swords flew out. They circled around him for a moment and then shot away. The mist seethed, covering the entire area. The heat in the area continued to turn to the rain into mist. Thunder pealed out and lightning crashed down. One after another, blood-curdling screams rang out from within the mist. Meng Hao's shadow flitted about inside, carrying death. The two wooden swords swept forward, severing a disciple's head. The disciple's eyes filled with astonishment in the instant before he died. Slaughter echoed out. Meng Hao moved like a specter, crushing another cultivator with cracking sounds. He tossed the body up ahead to block an incoming spear. A boom rang out as the corpse exploded to pieces. Meng Hao strode forward. He waved his right arm, summoning the wind blade. It shot forward, slicing another body to bits that fell from the mist. Zhou Jai frowned when he saw this. However, he continued to manipulate the incense burner. The smoke drifting up from it appeared to be about 60% congealed. Suddenly, another miserable shriek sounded out from within the mist. A black Civ sect disciple, his body half destroyed, stumbled out. Just when it seemed he would escape successfully, Meng Hao's hand shot out and grabbed him by the top of the head. He pushed down and the cultivator screamed. Meng Hao's face emerged for a moment from the mist. He looked over at Zhou Jai. Zhou Jai looked back, and as their gazes locked, Meng Hao smiled and then disappeared back into the mist. He released his hand, and the black Civ sect disciple slumped to the ground dead, his eyes still wide open. Zhou Jai trembled at the sight of it, and an unsightly expression appeared on his face. The screams from within the mist seemed to be growing further and further apart. The booms grew weaker. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the mist. "Elder Brother Zhou, save me," cried one of the black Civ sect disciples. His right arm had been severed, and a horrified expression covered his face. Despite his all-out push to escape, the words were barely out of his mouth when a meter-long phantom hand shot out from the mist. It moved at incredible speed, catching up to the escaping cultivator in the blink of an eye. It slammed into him, and a deafening explosion filled the air. The cultivator's body began to tremble, and he opened his mouth to say something. Before he could, his body exploded. By this time, the mist surrounding Meng Hao was beginning to dissipate. Meng Hao walked out. From the look of his robe and long hair, he seemed like a weak scholar, but the coldness in his eyes caused Zhou Jai to tremble. More than 10 cultivators of the late Foundation establishment stage, and only Meng Hao had emerged alive from the mist. "Your Excellency's methods are rather ruthless," said Zhou Jai, lowering his hand. He knew that he had run out of time and wouldn't be able to continue his work with the incense burner. The Black Civ sect had completely misjudged Meng Hao's cultivation base. Patriarch Violet Civ had received information on Meng Hao's cultivation base from the sect elder in the Song clan. He knew that his power exceeded that of the mid-Foundation establishment stage, and was more akin to the late Foundation establishment stage. However, Zhou Jai was now well aware that Meng Hao's battle power was not comparable to the late Foundation establishment stage. In fact, it could exhibit terrifying pressure that exceeded such power. After close observation just now, Zhou Jai got the powerful sense that his opponent's spiritual power was completely different from that of others. It looked like spiritual power, but it seemed to somehow be branded specifically to Meng Hao. Logically speaking, the spiritual power of magical techniques with which Meng Hao attacked should eventually dissipate back into heaven and earth. However, the power left over by Meng Hao's attacks did not dissolve away. Instead, they seemed to be rejected by heaven and earth. They just floated there like oil on water. This rejected power's explosiveness was key to Meng Hao's strength. Zhou Jai grasped this quickly but couldn't solve it. Fear filled his heart. With this explosiveness, Meng Hao could decimate late Foundation establishment cultivators as easily as crushing dry weeds. That was obvious. Meng Hao's spiritual power was different. His alone. Other cultivators' spiritual energy belonged to heaven and earth. By practicing breathing techniques, cultivators could borrow it. Based on the various stages of cultivation, the amount of time it could be borrowed varied. Yet all spiritual energy returns to heaven and earth upon death. It was a cycle. Just like the 9 paths in front of the gray-robed old man atop the world tree, it was a rule of heaven and earth. "I'm actually not ruthless," said Meng Hao indifferently. "You people are. Actually, I'm pretty soft-hearted. However, your presence here is a bit of a problem." He waved his hand, causing the mist behind him to disperse fully. The rain descended onto the two of them, seemingly dividing them inseparably. However, their gazes locked and their expressions grew fiercer. "I am Zhou Jai, Tao child of the Black Sieve sect." He lifted his hand, and a 1-foot-long blue joss stick appeared. The joss stick was lit, and smoke curled up from its end to form the shape of a sword that glowed mysteriously. This was clearly no ordinary joss stick. "I am Meng Hao from the state of Zhao," he said coolly, flashing an incantation gesture. The two wooden swords appeared and rotated slowly around him. They emanated glowing sword auras and emitted a droning buzz that made seem as if they thirsted for blood. This was not Meng Hao's first battle with a Dao child. He had fought Li Dai and forced him to flee with an arm severed. Then he had encountered Li Shiki and had competed against her in demonstrations of strength. Now he was up against Zhou Jai. 3 Dao pillars against Li Dai, 4 against Li Shiki, now 5, Meng Hao thought. I will prove their invincibility. An exuberant gleam filled his eyes. The swords seemed to sense his desire, their droning louder, their auras gleaming brighter. "You resemble a woman I met while traveling years ago. I pursued her, but nothing came of it. She wasn't named Meng." Zhou Jai shook his head. Meng Hao deserved his respect. Among Southern Domain Foundation establishment cultivators, he'd respected only about 10. Each and every one of them was a Dao child. Today, he recognized Meng Hao could stand shoulder to shoulder with the current generation of Dao children. His words left his mouth and Zhou Jai's body exploded with Great Circle Foundation establishment power. It rippled out, his hair whipping about, rainwater fleeing as if afraid to touch him. Fierce light filled his eyes as he strode toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flashed. He strode forward too, his spiritual sense shooting out. Rain fell as the battle of Foundation establishment peaks began. This chapter sponsored by Fan from Wa. Chapter 202, Confrontation of the Peaks. The multiple layers of clouds overhead smashed into each other, and the sound of thunder shook the earth. Down below, Meng Hao and Zhou Jai strode toward each other. Their eyes locked, and the power of their spiritual sense rocketed forward. Spiritual sense attacks are formless and invisible, yet far exceed magical items in killing potential. Locked in each other's gaze, both trembled. Zhou Jai felt crushed by innumerable mountains, blood oozing from his mouth. He set his jaw, and a look of ferocity sprang up onto his face. Meng Hao seemed affected, but no blood appeared. He snorted coldly and continued forward. As his step descended, both trembled again. Zhou Jai's face paled. Inferior in spiritual sense, he retreated several paces, flashing an incantation with his left hand. The foot-long joss stick in his right hand immediately let off twisting strands of smoke which transformed into a curved blade that shot toward Meng Hao. As it flew, the smoke spread out, soon forming the outline of a figure. It appeared as if a person were holding the curved blade, chopping it directly toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao's eyes flickered. His left hand formed an incantation gesture, and the two seemingly eager wooden swords emitted an intense droning sound, and then transformed into 2 beams of light which split the air as they sped toward the curved blade. They clashed instantly, no evasion, no twirling. As archenemies, they slammed with such force that destruction was certain. A boom echoed out, and Meng Hao waved both of his hands. It was as if there were invisible strings attaching the wooden swords to him. They immediately began to emit an intense sword aura that rippled out to fill the area. Everything started to shake. Who would possibly dare to approach? A boom sounded. Zhou Jai's eyes grew strange. He waved his left hand, then pressed down on the joss stick. More smoke billowed out, instantly transforming into more than 10 weapons wielded by phantoms charging at Meng Hao. Meng Hao's face remained calm. He lifted and extended his hands outward. The swords emitted explosive screeching. Spiritual energy of heaven and earth rushed toward them. Auras expanded 30 meters, the swords transforming into sword dragons circling Meng Hao. The smoke phantoms roared, disintegrating one by one, unable to approach. "So you like defense," said Zhou Jai coolly. "I can help with that." A cold light shone in his eyes as his left hand flashed with another incantation gesture and then pressed up against the joss stick. It burned more furiously, and large quantities of smoke poured out. The smoke formed layers which expanded out in concentric rings. Each ring larger than the last, more than 100 formed and shot toward Meng Hao. They spun around him, as if in an attempt to envelop him. The rings nearly swallowed him, yet his expression never changed. He opened his mouth, and lightning mist appeared. The lightning mist had absorbed tribulation lightning and will from the square cauldron. Now it underwent another bizarre transformation. As it spread out, thunder crashed up above in the sky. The mist affected the clouds, making them congregate. Soon the area would become a sea of lightning. The mist expanded, lightning crashing down, roaring filling the sky. Touched by lightning, the rings exploded into fragments. Zhou Jai's eyes narrowed. He hadn't expected this. Meng Hao walked forward, surrounded by lightning mist. The mist roiled, thunderous booms filling the air. Incited by lightning, the swords exploded with vicious will. His hair whipped and rain poured down. Anyone who saw him would be struck to the heart with a frightening, demonic sensation. Suddenly, a domineering aura began to emanate from Meng Hao, the first time such an aura had appeared on him. "Actually, what I like best is attacking," said Meng Hao casually, striding forward with overwhelming power. He was like an ancient wild beast ready to conquer the world. Zhou Jai's expression flickered, suppressing the urge to retreat. Meng Hao seemed completely different from when defending. He overflowed with ferocity, like a sheathed sword just drawn. Time to display skill. 1 step, 2, 3, each thundered louder. Lightning filled the sky. His cultivation power exploded out, bolstered by expanding spiritual sense. Zhou Jai was shocked. He knew he must stop Meng Hao from gathering more momentum or he'd be unstoppable. As Meng Hao's third step landed, determination filled Zhou Jai's eyes. He loosened his hand and the half-foot joss stick flew up. Blood veins shot through Zhou Jai's eyes as both hands flickered with incantations. He shoved them forward. "Green smoke exterminating the East Pass." The words flowed with his gesture. The joss stick ignited, burning a significant amount of its length to create a thick smoke which flew straight toward Meng Hao. "Burst!" cried Zhou Jai. The smoke exploded outward, everything shaking violently, the blast drowning thunder. It covered the lightning, rippling out in greenish waves of deadly, exterminating power. Meng Hao's body shook. The lightning mist quivered, bursting under the attack. The swords fought back, but he flew backward 4 or 5 paces, blood seeping from his mouth. "Dao children from great sects really are formidable," Meng Hao said, taking a deep breath, eyes flickering. Zhou Jai's face paled, but his eyes gleamed as he extended his hands again. More of the stick burned away, now barely 2 inches. Thick smoke roiled toward Meng Hao. "Burst!" howled Zhou Jai, blood lines appearing in his eyes. As the smoke exploded, Meng Hao struck forward 5 times. Black Sieve 5 strikes, 2. This technique was learned by Meng Hao in Chapter 149, Killing Intent, and the following chapter, and was also used in Chapter 184, 7 Exterminations. The 5 strikes executed at extreme speed, completed in a blink. An enormous hand appeared, shooting toward the smoke. An earth-shaking boom resounded. Raindrops exploded into mist. Meng Hao shot backward a pace. His 5 perfect Dao pillars rotated, repeating the 5-strike attack. 1 hand, 2 hands. In a blink, 10 giant hands appeared before him, a frightening sight. The hands glowed golden, whistling through the air toward Zhou Jai. Zhou Jai's eyes filled with blood. His hands flickered continuously. The stick was completely burned away. The smoke shot toward his incoming hands. When they collided, a huge boom filled the air. A gale shot outward, ripples emanating. Trees swayed, rainwater transformed to mist. Blood sprayed from his mouth, yet his expression grew fiercer. Zhou Jai staggered backward 7 or 8 steps, coughing up blood. His face was pale, and yet his eyes gleamed brightly. Neither spoke, staring at each other. Both knew this battle was far from over. Zhou Jai had used only 1 magical item, no sect techniques or killing moves. Neither had Meng Hao. They looked at each other for 3 breaths, then Zhou Jai lifted his head and laughed. "The great black cloud's palm, a familiar technique, brother Meng. Since you know it, let me show why the Black Sieve sect earned its name." He lifted his right hand, breathing becoming ragged. As his hand rose, 26 illusory hand images appeared. Zhou Jai's eyes narrowed, stretching his hand toward Meng Hao. "This is the true great black cloud's palm," he cried, striking forward as an enormous hand appeared. It emitted black glow composed of mist, the namesake black clouds. The black cloud's palm screamed toward Meng Hao, filling the area with roar. This vastly exceeded the incomplete version he'd learned. Meng Hao's eyes gleamed. He said nothing. His nature when engaged in battle, everything he wanted to say came through attacks. He lifted his right hand and used his index finger to slice his thumb. Blood flowed out, his vision turning red. Chapter 203, I am strong, I shall take my stand. Blood immortal legacy. Without a face, a single word, the flames of war unify. Sundered clouds, a bloody rain seas that fill the sky. Capture the gods, advance the troops, fire consumes the towers. Forge all spirits and bloodlines into the 9 killing powers. 1. These words first appeared in Chapter 37, 10th Patriarch of the Wang clan. Please don't memorize these lines because I may go back later to adjust them. These words contained magical powers. Unleashing it required core formation. Meng Hao knew he was incapable. However, the Blood Finger, Blood Palm, and Blood Death World required no cultivation base level. With sufficient spiritual energy, they could be unleashed. These, along with the 8th Demon Sealing Hex, were his killing moves. Meng Hao had used the Blood Finger multiple times to reach this day. It was uniquely powerful, shocking to behold. The world before him appeared red, a sign of the Blood Finger. He'd grown used to this blood-red world. Zhou Jai's great black cloud's palm, a massive hand, screamed toward him. The hand seemed formed from black mist, interlaced with strange qi. As it approached, it grew larger. Soon it would fill his vision, blotting out the world. It reminded him of Lord Revelation hovering above the Reliance sect, sending a palm strike downward. Then he'd been too weak to resist. The palm destroyed the sect and left a massive handprint. But a red blur appeared, a sword severing heaven and earth, splitting the hand. He could see that massive hand descending again. 2. The events with Lord Revelation happened in Chapter 93. Sever the Tao, change heaven and earth, demonic will. Zhou Jai couldn't compare to Lord Revelation, yet today's scene was reminiscent. Meng Hao smiled silently. He lifted his hand toward the palm, which grew closer and larger, fierce wind whipping his clothes and hair. He lifted his thumb and slashed it toward the incoming palm. It was like blinding light in pitch darkness, like opening eyes for the first time. Like the demon lord severing Lord Revelation's palm. It was evidence of Meng Hao's enlightenment beneath that massive palm in the Reliance sect. I'm strong, I shall take my stand. A roaring boom filled the air. Meng Hao stood motionless. 7 inches from him, a crack appeared at the palm's top, snaking down through it. It split wider and wider. Meng Hao stood calmly as the palm passed. Wind screamed, whipping his hair, yet his eyes shined brightly, sunlight in darkness, blinding to behold. Keep going, asked Meng Hao, flicking his sleeve. Zhou Jai stood silently. Bitterness arose, then the will to fight sparked again. Of course, he replied. From becoming Tao Child until now, I've never been defeated. He took a breath, waving toward the incense burner. It trembled, cracks appearing, popping sounds ringing as it collapsed. No one interferes now. Simple words and actions, yet they revealed incredible power. Even this seed of power caused Meng Hao's eyes to narrow. He's cut off his own retreat, Meng Hao thought. With nowhere to run, he must rely on himself and unleash all his power. Zhou Jai really is outstanding. 3. This is a slight play on words because the Jai character in Zhou Jai's name means outstanding. He nodded. Zhou Jai lifted his hand and pressed down on his bag of holding. 5 glittering strands of light emerged, brilliant light filling the air. 5 glowing swords hovered before him. 5 glittering swords, glowing with varied colors. He extended his fingers, and 1 sword hovered beneath each. Civ Moon Mother Earth, heaven-splitting sword formation. He pushed down, the swords following and disappearing. Meng Hao's pupils constricted, and he shot backward 6 paces. The 5 swords reappeared instantly, shooting upward toward him. Dazzling light as they screamed through the air, instantly upon him. Sword auras billowed, sword qi locking him tight, death surrounding. Interesting, Meng Hao said, lifting his thumb toward the swords. A boom filled the air, a blood-colored shield surrounding him 30 meters in each direction. The sword slammed into it, causing a massive roar. Zhou Jai coughed up blood, his hands flickering. The sword screamed, light flashing, 5 becoming 25. The swords filled the air, shooting toward him. Their intense power threatened death. Yet his expression never changed. He flicked his sleeve, slashing his finger with his thumb. Blood poured out as he gestured upward. The massive explosion distorted vision, everything twisting. The swords blocked, Zhou Jai howled, veins popping on his face. The swords flew up and transformed instantly. 125 swords now descended from all directions. They slammed into the shield, which distorted and shrank 10 meters. Nearly half passed through, pressing toward him. Meng Hao slashed his 3rd and 4th fingers, then his 5th. Blood glow filled the air. 5 fingers covered in blood, forming a bloody handprint. This was the blood palm, the 2nd legacy technique. It appeared, filling the sky with roar. A massive palm coalesced above him. He waved, the glow spreading, sweeping through the swords, causing them to tremble and fly backward. He took a step forward, waving again. A roaring sound filled the space 300 meters around him. The massive hand shot upward, clenching into a fist. Zhou Jai's face twisted, blood dripping, his incantations attempting to regather the swords. His face drained of color. The swords were under the fist's control, struggling but unable to free themselves. 30 swords trembled violently, whining and collapsing into pieces. Meng Hao snorted. Roaring filled the air as 30 more disintegrated, then another 30, and finally another. In a few breaths all swords were shattered. The hand disappeared, 5 crack-filled swords appearing before him. "One last technique," said Zhou Jai through clenched teeth. His eyes crimson, Meng Hao waved his hand, sending the swords into his bag of holding. "Black Sieve, immortal subjugation," howled Zhou Jai. His left hand pressed his forehead as his right waved. Dozens of jade slips flew out, cracking into pieces. A sweet aroma filled the air, then turned disgusting. A chi filled the area, seeming to belong to Zhou Jai. Meng Hao's eyes flickered as the archaic voice from the demon sealing Jade echoed in his mind. "Hosts of evil spirits which call themselves immortals, Chinese letter. But why fear a man, Chinese letter, and a mountain, Chinese letter? If you encounter them, seal them immediately." 3. As you should be able to see by looking closely, the character for immortal is made up of the character for person and mountain. In this passage, the voice is kind of making fun of these spirits which claim the title immortal. There was an analysis of the character immortal in chapter 118. Without entering Mount Heaven, immortal ascension is impossible. Meng Hao was used to the voice. He looked at Zhou Jai, sensing increasingly powerful qi radiating from him. Zhou Jai's face twisted, countless other faces flickering atop his own. Anguish filled his face, life draining, his face growing dark. This technique couldn't be used by Foundation establishment cultivators, not even a Dao child. Demon sealing, 8th hex. Meng Hao lifted his hand. A qi emanated from him, invisible to outsiders but visible to the spirits pouring into Zhou Jai. The faces hovering on his face filled with terror. This chapter was sponsored by Fan from Hua. Chapter 204, The League of Demon Sealers. Demon Sealing, 8th hex. This was the only demon sealing technique Meng Hao had truly mastered, truly a divine ability. Every generation of demon sealers must create a new hex, and this one was created by the 8th generation demon sealer. As the 9th generation demon sealer, Meng Hao should have been prepared to face everything. However, patriarch reliance had ruined everything. Had it not been for a host of coincidences, as well as good fortune, Meng Hao would never have been able to learn the 8th demon sealing hex. He took a deep breath, lowering his hand. Ghost images appeared, Meng Hao trembling, the world shaking. Everything folded onto Zhou Jai, countless images appearing around him. In an instant it happened. Ghost images vanished as miserable screams echoed, not Zhou Jai's voice but the spirits. Zhou Jai trembled, confusion filling his eyes. Black aura drifted from his body, dense and filled with 9 phantom old men, faces twisted. They glared. No observer could see or hear them. Meng Hao was the only one. His blood confirmed his identity as the 9th generation demon sealer. The phantom spirits screamed and spoke. "The League of Demon Sealers, you're the 9th generation. The day our Tao was realized, you demon sealers blocked us, refined us, preventing us from becoming demons. Who cares about the League of Demon Sealers? They'll become like us eventually, discarnate souls of heaven and earth." As their words echoed out, their bodies began to tremble, and their screams grew more intense. The black aura around them began to dissipate, and they began to be absorbed into the ground. Their figures grew indistinct and then began to disappear. Meng Hao watched thoughtfully. He was gradually learning about the League. Coldness flashed through his eyes. He waved his hand and the souls vanished, their dying cries echoing. "Shatter the League of Demon Sealers. Lord Jai has replaced the heavens and forged the immortality bestowal dais. We struggled to become immortal and then died. What of it? Your League prevented us from achieving our Tao. Just wait until things change, then see which of the countless discarnate souls in heaven and earth will devour you." As the sound of the voices continued to echo out, Zhou Jai's pale face began to recover its complexion. His eyes were still filled with confusion. Meng Hao glanced at him thoughtfully for a moment, then turned with the flick of a sleeve and began to walk off into the rain. Zhou Jai watched him disappear. He took a deep breath and clasped hands, bowing deeply. "Next time we fight, I won't kill you," he said softly. "I'll repay your kindness and prove my cultivation's determination." He turned, disappearing into light. Deep in the Black Sieve 100,000 mountains, As the souls died, furious howls erupted. Yet not a single disciple heard them. The League of Demon Sealers. He's of the League of Demon Sealers. Damn each demon sealer generation. Lord Jai fears them and cursed the ninth to die. This is the ninth. Death to the League of Demon Sealers every generation. Immortality bestowed Deus lacks only a demon sealer's spirit. Find and snatch his spirit. The mountains shook, the ground shook as if awakened. Black aura pulses drifted up, darkening the sky. But as the black aura was about to shoot out, the corpse near the rebirth cave suddenly shook. An aura emerged, invisible to living eyes, instantly spreading throughout the southern domain with terrifying force. The souls beneath trembled, everything grew silent. Who are you? A powerful aura exploded from deep beneath the mountains. It caused the corpse to tremble, other souls prostrated as if it were their sovereign. The aura filled the sky, covering millions of kilometers. Everything became pitch black, yet no one could see it. The sky appeared as blue as ever. The deep, archaic voice responded, "I came seeking destiny." The sound echoed, ancient with countless years. It seemed tired. Within it, a barely detectable killing aura. The voice contained a shocking will. "What do you want?" said the sovereign aura. "Destiny comes and goes. The Tao exists eternally. This kid has destiny. Interfere and I'll slaughter all of you." The aura faded. A haughty voice rang out. "We'll come for you. Send 30 black civ sect chosen to our black underworld cave. We return to the mortal world." Deep in the rebirth cave lay a corpse, not human but a small fish, hand-sized. Where the fish's eyes had been burned a dark fire. Deep beneath the Milky Way sea, the rope stretched along the seafloor toward the wooden coffin amidst the massive stone formation. A scratching sound echoed from inside, fingernails on the lid. A raspy voice sounded, "League of Demon Sealers." Filled with melancholy, it drifted up, stirring a violent storm on the sea's surface. End of Book 2, Cutting into the Southern Domain. Note from Urgent, this chapter is about 1,000 characters short. However, all the details have been spelled out. You could say that this chapter is sort of a wrap-up. More exciting chapters are coming up. I really need to take some time to plan for Book 3. Book 3 will be the best I've written so far. Note from Deathblade, he's right. Book 3 is amazing. Book 3, The Honor of Violet Fate. Chapter 205, Dispelling Poison with the Cubic Pearl. Rain continued falling. The horizon brightened as moonlight broke through clouds, morning sun glowing in the distance. As sun replaced moon, Meng Hao proceeded onward, his expression calm. This rainy day made him think about the snow back in the state of Zhao. Unsure of his location, he saw only distant mountains, rain and cold wind. His battle with Zhou Jai confirmed his 5 Tao pillars could suppress Tao children. "I'm still lacking techniques and magical items," he thought, walking in rain. The cultivation world was different from a scholar's life. He had to identify his weaknesses or die in the next battle. Joining the Violet Fate sect would help with techniques. As for magical items, he'd acquired all his items through battle. As his cultivation grew, they became less effective. The wooden swords, lightning mist, and black net grew with him, but the fan, bow, and others grew useless. "I have 2 methods to forge items. I could search the black lands for the frigid snow larva, feed it the sieve net thunder mulberry leaf, and transform it into the eyeless larva for indestructible silk." 1. The eyeless larva was last mentioned in chapter 165. Or the jade page from Han Bei's ancestor to forge a time treasure. Both are difficult and slow. The flag with 3 streamers is beyond my reach. He shook his head, looking at the rain. It grew heavier. Meng Hao shot toward the mountains, waving his hand. A flying sword carved an immortal's cave into the mountainside. He flitted into the cave and sat cross-legged. His cultivation base rippled, heat spreading, instantly drying the cave. He spat out the lightning mist, covering the cave. He closed his eyes and rotated his cultivation base. After half an incense burned, he opened his eyes and retrieved the cubic pearl. At first glance it seemed square but wasn't, very bizarre. Meng Hao took a deep breath, his eyes bright with anticipation. He took out the copper mirror and made a copy. Low on spirit stones, he decided not to make more. "I hope this pearl can dispel the resurrection lily's poison," he said, eyeing it brightly. Unsure how it worked but confident in his late foundation establishment power, he cast his spiritual sense into it. He frowned, then bit his tongue and spit blood onto the pearl. It absorbed instantly, then began to melt. White light floated up with purifying fragrance. Meng Hao waved his hand, the cave shaking. A vine burrowed up from a crack. The vine stretched toward the strands and absorbed them instantly. After 10 breaths, the vine changed from dark red to pure white, radiating purity. Meng Hao watched the slowly melting pearl, determination filling his eyes. He breathed deeply, the strands flying toward him, entering through his mouth and nose. His eyes closed. After 10 breaths his body quivered, veins bulging. His eyes snapped open, demonic faces showing in his pupils, white strands layering on top. The strands attempted to purify the resurrection lily. An hour passed. Sweat poured off him, his face pale, his eyes stubborn. He breathed deeply, more strands entering. The demonic faces twisted as faint screams echoed in his mind, his body tearing apart inside. Ghost images appeared, black aura pouring from his head, coalescing into a 3-colored resurrection lily. The pearl seemed about to darken, now half its size, its strands about to disappear. Meng Hao's eyes shined. He reached out and consumed the entire pearl. A roaring sound filled his body, harmony with the thunder outside. The lily writhed and showed signs of dissipation. Shrill shrieks filled his head as his face distorted. He lifted the second pearl and gritted his teeth, making another copy. Out of spirit stones, he lifted both pearls and consumed them. A thunderous roar filled him as the pearls entered his mouth, expanding to fill the surrounding mountains. White strands spread from his pores, surrounding him. The lily quivered and began fading. As Meng Hao sat surrounded by white mist, demonic faces slowly faded. The pearl was working. After an hour the lily was almost invisible, no trace of demonic faces. But then, the mist diffused outward, white strands seething and congealing above him. Red, yellow, and blue streaks appeared, mixing to form a 4-colored resurrection lily. The lily couldn't be destroyed, it reappeared like reincarnation. Meng Hao's face twisted, then his eyes shined. The 4-colored lily's aura was no stronger than before, and it trembled. That's not the 4th color. Meng Hao realized his lily was different from the one in the tournament. 1. Meng Hao encountered the 4-colored resurrection lily in chapter 125 and the chapter after that. It didn't mention the specific colors of the petals, though. If it had a true 4th color, I'd have transformed. I'm fine, this color. The lily spasmed, white petals collapsing into light. The light shot toward the blue petals, the lily trembling violently. Meng Hao observed, eyes shining. The blue petals withered and disappeared, but barely remained visible. The lily would slowly regain them. The 2-colored lily seemed weaker yet purer. The cubic pearl had reduced 1 color but couldn't eliminate it. The lily flickered and sank back into him, much weaker now. Meng Hao stood, resolve filling his eyes. The cubic pearl helped. To completely dispel the poison, I must infiltrate the Violet Fate sect. This poison remains a bone in my throat. This chapter was sponsored by Fan from Hua. Chapter 206, The Huang Clan 5 Immortals. Meng Hao slapped his bag of holding to retrieve the blood-colored mask. He looked at it for a moment. Unless it was absolutely necessary, he didn't want to get tangled up with the meat jelly again. It had reached a terrifying level in terms of being annoying, which Meng Hao had experienced firsthand. After a moment of thought, he reached into the mask with spiritual sense. It was dark inside, and as soon as Meng Hao entered, he sensed the mastiff's aura. It was growing more and more powerful, causing Meng Hao to feel somewhat calm. The blood mastiff was his most powerful and deadly ally. He couldn't wait for it wake to up and stand at his side like it had when it was a puppy. It would lift its head to the sky and roar. Next, Meng Hao's spiritual sense moved on, pausing for a moment on the flag of 3 streamers. After a moment, he moved on. It was obviously a precious treasure, but he couldn't do anything with it now. When his spiritual sense reached the Li clan patriarch, he stared in shock. The man was more thin and pallid than ever. He was incredibly weak, and it seemed as if his spirit might collapse at any moment. Despair filled his eyes. Meng Hao suddenly got the feeling that he had underestimated the fearsomeness of the meat jelly. The meat jelly parrot was currently perched on the shoulder of the Li clan patriarch, its eyes glowing as it talked. Every few breaths, the Li clan patriarch would shudder. Meng Hao hesitated, then gritted his teeth and slowly approached. The meat jelly suddenly looked up, having sensed Meng Hao's spiritual sense. It cried out, You're here. Why don't you join us? The old man and I were just discussing a sunset from 70,000 years ago. We haven't finished yet, and he promised to listen until the end. The meat jelly seemed very excited at the prospect of Meng Hao joining the discussion. Meng Hao's heart trembled, but before he could say anything, the Li clan patriarch looked over at him. His eyes glistened as if he were looking at a blood relative, and he emitted an excited shout. It was a shout that seemed to be filled with reckless abandon. My name is Li Zufeng. I'm a patriarch of the Li clan from 7,000 years ago. I possessed one of the divine watchmen within the Blood Immortal Legacy Tournament. I beg you, please take the bird away. I'll tell you everything. Ask me anything. What do you want to know? I know techniques from the Li clan, divine abilities. Whatever you want to do, I can help you. I can tell you anything. Please take it away. Shut your mouth, said the meat jelly indignantly. You show no respect for your elders. Am I really so annoying? Why you're too immoral. You're mine. He turned to look solemnly at Meng Hao. He's mine. I still haven't brought him back from the path of wickedness. I still have 70,000 years of. He's yours, said Meng Hao hurriedly in a voice which could sever nails and slice iron. Without hesitation he continued, I guarantee it. He's definitely yours. Very well then. You seem to be in a lovely mood, so I won't permit you to participate in the current discussion. I need to teach a lesson or two to this old man, it said angrily. I can't believe he tried to tattle on me. I hate tattling, it's very immoral. It spoke with fury, but excitement filled its eyes. The sudden introduction of a new conversation topic made it very enthusiastic. Despair filled the face of the Li clan patriarch. He gazed pleadingly at Meng Hao, his eyes filled with regret. Why had he insisted on being so arrogant before? If he had just yielded earlier, he would never have been forced to face the torment of this frightening bird. His life recently had been a living hell, a nightmare worse than death. His entire body suddenly shook. Meng Hao cleared his throat. Paying very close attention to his wording, Meng Hao said, Senior, I was thinking about your ever-changing forms. Soon, Junior will be infiltrating a sect. Is there any way Senior could possibly lend me some of your power of ever-changing forms? Even as he spoke, he slowly edged backward. The meat jelly turned and looked at Meng Hao in surprise. What are you going to do? Are you planning some evil deed? Of course not. His voice filled with an air of righteousness, Meng Hao said, You see, there are some extremely wicked people in this sect. I want to infiltrate them in an attempt to catch the evildoers. Then, Senior can educate them and help bring them back from the path of wickedness. The meat jelly suddenly seemed very excited. Oh, so that's your plan. Very well, very well. Meng Hao, you are really doing the right thing. Such evildoers really must be educated by me. Although, suddenly it seemed hesitant. Meng Hao's next words were spoken in a mesmerizing tone. Senior, how about this? Over the next few days, I will go capture some bullies for you to guide and help. Oh, the meat jelly seemed even more excited, and its hesitation began to wane. It was time to strike while the iron was hot. How about 2 bullies? Said Meng Hao. The meat jelly quivered and flapped its wings excitedly. However, it still seemed a bit hesitant. Gritting his teeth, Meng Hao said, 5 bullies. It will take me a few days, but I can go find 5 bullies for you. The meat jelly let out a delighted squawk. Its entire body shook and its eyes shined red with excitement. It stared at Meng Hao, panting. Bring me 3 bullies, it cried. It looked at Meng Hao nervously as if it were worried he would disagree. Huh, 3? Meng Hao stared in shock. At first he had assumed the meat jelly would try to get even more out of the deal. Instead, it was the opposite. 3, roared the meat jelly. Bring me 3 bullies and I'll help you. Less than 3 and the deal's off. It seemed it felt it was risking everything in its request. Meng Hao felt that the whole situation was very strange, but he nodded nonetheless. Okay, I'll get you 3 bullies, not 1 less. With that, he retracted his spiritual sense. He took a deep breath as he looked at the blood-colored mask. A strange expression covered his face. Could it be that the meat jelly doesn't know how to count? I offered 5, and then it demanded 3 and looked like it was going all out. Mumbling to himself, Meng Hao put the mask away, turned, and left the immortal's cave. The rain had long since ceased. He turned into a white beam of light which shot off into the distance. 2 days later, on a mountain path walked a muscular man of about 30 years of age. He wore a yellow gown, had small eyes, and a mustache shaped like the character Chinese letter. Next to him walked a young man, toward whom he smiled and said, Junior brother Meng, it's not far now. Up ahead is where my older brothers and I reside. Once we're there, you'll have to stay for a while. You and I hit it off immediately, didn't we? We'll definitely have to become sworn brothers. You know, the Huang Clan 5 immortals are very well known in these parts. We can really be of some help to you. The young man had a bashful expression on his face. His cultivation base seemed to be at the 8th level of chi condensation, 1 level higher than the yellow-robed man. Thanks, big bro Huang, the young man said shyly. This is the first time I ever left the sect, so I'm very fortunate to have met you. Outside your sect, you have to rely on friends. It's really no imposition. My older brothers and I are all very hospitable. Little bro, you're so young and yet have such a high cultivation base. Your future prospects are limitless. I'm sure that you'll soon be a very famous person in the southern domain. You might even be able to outshine Chosen. You know, my older brothers and I think that making friends is very important, and we're happy to do so. The yellow-robed man laughed heartily, then slapped Meng Hao on the shoulder. His eyes, however, glittered with contempt and greed. He glanced conspicuously at Meng Hao's bag of holding. He had never seen such a bag of holding before. It was obviously something beyond ordinary. Of course, a man like him would never have a chance to lay eyes on such a bag of holding. This bag was none other than the bag of the cosmos, and the young man was obviously Meng Hao. They had run into each other just this morning out in the wild mountains. The instant the man caught sight of the bag of the cosmos, he had coveted it. But once he saw the level of Meng Hao's cultivation base, he gave up any ideas of trying to steal it. Instead, he had engaged in lively small talk for quite some time. The man smiled at Meng Hao and thought, some disciple from a sect I've never heard of goes out on his own for the first time. A disciple like that must surely have some life-saving treasures from his sect. However, someone like this doesn't have any experience. Only a few flattering words and I've already won him over. In the man's mind, he had already figured everything out about his opponent. Meng Hao looked more bashful than ever. However, in his heart, he was rejoicing. It had only taken him 2 days to find some local tyrant cultivators. Even better, the man was leading him to a place where there would surely be more tyrants of the type that the meat jelly would like. As they chatted, an immortal's cave suddenly appeared up ahead of them at the bottom of a mountain. Its sealed main door was enormous, made from solid limestone. From the look of it, the immortal's cave must take up half the inside of the mountain. On either side of the main door were 2 stone guardian lions, extremely lifelike in appearance. They didn't seem to fit in with the surroundings, as if they had been transported here from somewhere else. There were also 2 towers near the entrance of the immortal's cave. These towers were constructed, not from earth and wood, but from bones. There were bones of both humans and animals, all piled up. It all was very gruesome. "Here we are, little bro," said the yellow-robed man, laughing loudly. Meng Hao frowned. "This place." "I know what you're thinking," said the man. He continued, his voice firm, "but we're out in the wilderness. Though we don't cause problems for others, we do have to take some precautionary methods. Decorations like this only serve to frighten off the thieves and miscreants." Meng Hao didn't respond, but a cold light gleamed in his eyes. The yellow-robed man didn't notice Meng Hao's look. He waved his sleeve, and a flying sword flew out. He jumped on, and transformed into a colorful beam of light which glided through the air toward the immortal's cave. Meng Hao followed suit, his eyes gleaming coldly. As the 2 of them approached the main door of the immortal's cave, the yellow-robed man waved his sleeve. A bright beam of light shot out, landing on the door. It rumbled, and then slowly began to open up. Almost as soon as the door began to open, 3 cultivators emerged from within. They were all about 40 years old, with cultivation bases at the 9th level of chi condensation. 2 had fierce bearings, while the other was lean and haggard, with treacherous eyes. He held a fan in hand. He smiled as his gaze swept over Meng Hao. The yellow-robed man laughed as he landed next to the 3 others. He turned and looked at Meng Hao, smiling. "Older brothers, I ran into friend Meng here on the road this morning. This is his first time outside of his sect. I invited him to spend some time with us. Please join me in welcoming him." In this case, Huang is the Chinese character Chinese letter Hong, which is a common surname, but also means yellow. Chapter 207. This is a pretty nice immortal's cave. The 2 large, fierce-looking men eyed Meng Hao for a moment and then smiled. Whichever way you looked at their smiles, they appeared vicious. It was as if they were staring down a helpless little lamb. The man with the fan seemed to be the most treacherous of the group, and his smile appeared the most sincere. He clasped hands and saluted Meng Hao. Huang heard the birds singing earlier and couldn't help but wonder if a guest would be arriving. "Fellow Taoist, a single glance at you and I felt the aura of a hero wash over me. Hearing 5th brother's words just now, I can tell that you are a dragon among men, venturing out of his sect for the first time. Fellow Taoist, you are the type of person I revere the most. Please come into our immortal's cave and relax for a moment." "Well," said Meng Hao, seemingly unsure of how to respond to such praise. Clasping hands, he bowed back to the man. However, he appeared to be hesitant to enter the cave. Inwardly, he sighed. The man's flattering words were obviously full of lies. Meng Hao could have come up with something much better to say were he in the other position. "Little bro," said the yellow-robed man, his eyes flickering, "we're here at the main door. Come, follow me in. Now that you're here, you're home." He pulled at Meng Hao's sleeve, dragging him into the immortal's cave. The other men clustered around, hesitating Meng Hao as the yellow-robed man graciously led him inside. The limestone door slowly closed behind them. Immediately, the glow of luminescent pearls filled Meng Hao's eyes. The immortal's cave was quite spacious and luxuriously decorated. It was filled with a variety of different rooms, including a pill-concocting room and a medicinal plant courtyard. With a candid laugh, the yellow-robed man made introductions. "Little bro, this is second brother and this is third brother. After fourth brother is me, the fifth brother." As he made the introductions, he gave a meaningful glance to the treacherous-looking man who ranked second. "Greetings, fellow Taoists," said Meng Hao shyly, clasping hands to them. He glanced around, a pleased expression in his eyes. When his gaze fell upon the luminescent pearls, his eyes shined brightly. "Fellow Taoist Meng, what do you think of our immortal's cave?" "Not bad, huh?" said second brother Huang with a smile, gently fanning himself. His expression was tinged with a disdainful look that he assumed others wouldn't see, an expression that made it clear he was playing some sort of game. He stared at Meng Hao. "It's pretty good," said Meng Hao, "pretty good. Very complete with plenty of private rooms. Really, it doesn't seem common in any aspect." His praises sounded very sincere. "These luminescent pearls are especially incredible. It seems the spiritual energy here is quite abundant. Don't tell me you have a spirit spring too?" He asked the question in a very astonished tone. "There absolutely is a spirit spring," said second brother Huang with a laugh. "That's exactly why the five of us decided to build our immortal's cave here." The contempt in his eyes grew more obvious. In his mind, Meng Hao was prey trapped in a tiger's lair. The third and fourth brothers Huang both gazed at Meng Hao, their hideous grins growing wider. They clearly viewed Meng Hao as a sheep in a wolf's den. As for fifth brother Huang, he continued to eye the bag of holding strapped to Meng Hao's waist. His smile grew more brilliant. He obviously thought that today was his lucky day to have snatched up such a cash cow. Meng Hao also smiled. Although he still looked a bit bashful, his smile was genuine and quite happy. The immortal's cave really seemed to contain some good opportunities, as did this group of men. They continued to herd him along. "Eldest brother recently brought in an artist to paint a portrait of him," said second brother Huang. "It's not really convenient for him to come out. Fellow Taoist Meng, why don't we go see him?" Without giving Meng Hao a chance to refuse, he pulled him toward the middle of the immortal's cave, where there was a vast, open area filled with luminescent pearls. At the far end was an enormous throne. The throne was constructed from crystals, and upon it sat a large man. He appeared to be about 50 years old. He wore a long violet robe and had a very dignified countenance. Even though he tried, it was impossible to cover up his fierceness. He radiated an intense killing aura. His cultivation base was not at the chi condensation stage, but the early foundation establishment stage. In front of the large man sat a stooped, withered old man with long white hair. His body trembled and the paintbrush in his hand quivered. The outline of the large man could be seen on the canvas in front of him. The man's eyes flashed over the group as they approached. He completely ignored Meng Hao, focusing instead on the yellow-robed man. He gave a cold harumph. "If you don't have something important to do, don't leave," he said. "I've been jumpy lately and have a bad feeling. Now that you're back, sit down. I'll have this painter do a portrait of all of you." Eyes filled with veneration, the yellow-robed man nodded his head in agreement. He stepped forward and sat down next to the violet-robed man. Second brother Huang and the others clasped hands in respectful salute. Ignoring Meng Hao altogether, they moved forward to sit down. No one said anything, and soon Meng Hao was standing there alone, an awkward expression on his face. The large, violet-robed man looked at the painter and said, "You paint some good portraits of us, you hear. If you do, then I won't cause any trouble for you." Hearing the man's cool words, the stooped, white-haired old man shivered and nodded. "Second brother, I've really been feeling uneasy lately. Don't forget to check the teleportation portal. If any problems occur, we can get out of here instantly. Third and fourth brothers, you two listen well. No going outside." Each and every word uttered by the violet-robed man caused the others to nod in agreement. None of them paid any attention whatsoever to Meng Hao. He stood there awkwardly. In his opinion, the man should at least greet him. Finally, he gave out a dry cough. They ignored the cough and continued talking. The violet-robed man didn't so much as look at him. The others, including the yellow-robed man, didn't look his way either. Meng Hao sighed, then coughed a little louder, interrupting the dialogue. Finally, the eyes of the five men fell upon him. "Who's this?" said the violet-robed man with a frown, his voice sinister. "That's a kid that fifth brother picked up when he went out," said second brother Huang, waving his fan. He laughed. "Apparently it's his first time out of his sect." "This kid is a real idiot," said the yellow-robed man, laughing. "His bag of holding is clearly incredible, so I chatted him up. Who could have imagined that he would be taken in by my rambling? I led him right here." Hearing this, the violet-robed man looked Meng Hao over, then coolly said, "Hand over your bag of holding." His expression was one of arrogance. Seeing that Meng Hao was at the qi condensation stage, he obviously felt that he was virtually beyond notice. Meng Hao smiled and glanced around. The look in his eye made it seem as if he were looking at his own house. "This is a pretty nice immortal's cave. Why don't you give it to me? Oh, your throne looks pretty good too, if a bit extravagant. I'll take that as well." The violet-robed man gaped at Meng Hao. The third and fourth Huang brothers, as well as the yellow-robed man, all burst out into arrogant laughter. As it echoed throughout the immortal's cave, second brother Huang's eyes narrowed and filled with a look of concentration. "Actually, I'll take all of you along with the immortal's cave," said Meng Hao. With a chuckle, he began to walk forward. Before he could even take a step, the third and fourth brothers Huang leaped up. They were tall and stalwart with fierce expressions. Laughing contemptuously, they rushed toward Meng Hao. "You brat, you dare to speak such nonsense in your elder's immortal's cave. Aren't you scared?" They weren't very far away from Meng Hao, and it took only a moment for them to near him. They were just about to employ some magical techniques when Meng Hao again cleared his throat. As he did, he completely ignored the two and took another step forward. When they ran into him, it was like they had slammed into some immovable force. Blood sprayed from their mouths, and their trembling bodies tumbled backward, slamming up against the wall. They coughed up more blood and looked in shock at Meng Hao. Their cultivation bases were suddenly suppressed, making them little more than mortals. Everything happened too quickly. Before the others could even react, Meng Hao had reached the crystal throne. "Are you looking to die?" cried the yellow-robed man. His body shot forward. Next to him, second brother Huang's eyes flickered and he waved his hand. A flame bird magically appeared, which shot toward Meng Hao. Second brother Huang himself, however, shot backward in retreat. All of this takes some time to describe, but actually happened in an instant. Meng Hao didn't even need to lift his hand. He glanced indifferently at the incoming yellow-robed man. The man's mind suddenly reeled, and he felt a stabbing pain as some incredible power pulsed in his heart. His vision grew dim, and he began to tremble in despair. The incredible pressure inundated him, and he was powerless to resist it. Blood shot from his mouth, and he tumbled backward, slamming into the wall. Fear and intense astonishment filled his eyes. His body trembled. The only thing he could think of was the weak, shy expression on Meng Hao's face when he had met him that made him look like a helpless animal. Who are you?" he said, his heart filling with indescribable dread. How could he possibly have imagined that what he brought into his home was not a helpless lamb, but a vicious wild beast? As for second brother Huang's flame bird, before it could even near Meng Hao, it shook, and then disintegrated. To Meng Hao, a flame bird technique such as this was like a child's toy sword. In the space of an instant, 4 of the Huang clan 5 immortals were reduced to a state of shock. The large, violet-robed man still sat on the crystal throne, his face draining of blood. He watched Meng Hao approaching and his face distorted. With a cry of rage, he leaped up. The instant he did, Meng Hao's gaze fell upon him. When the gaze entered the violet-robed man's eyes, it hit him like a world-shaking thunderclap. An incredible roaring filled his mind, causing his body to spasm. A feeling of imminent life-or-death crisis washed over him. It was as if this gaze could pierce the world itself and instantly exterminate him. "The great circle of Foundation establishment," gasped the large man, his voice faint. Disbelief filled his eyes. This chapter was sponsored by Fan from Wa. Chapter 208. Ask not the heavens regarding slaying the flower. Despair and bitterness welled up within the heart of the large, violet-robed man. He immediately lost all will to fight back. Being at early Foundation establishment, he simply didn't have the courage to attempt to fight with someone of the great circle of Foundation establishment. As Meng Hao calmly approached him, he retreated backward several paces. Without hesitation, he clasped hands and saluted. "Greetings, senior," he said. Then to the others, "Hey you, why haven't you paid respects to the elder?" Mumbling and trembling, the second brother Huang hurried over and bowed deeply to Meng Hao. His heart quivered with fear. How could he ever have imagined that what he previously believed to be a weak little lamb could instantly transform into a devilish fiend that could slaughter him hundreds of times over? Third and fourth brothers, as well as the yellow-robed man, immediately joined the violet-robed man. Trembling, the five brothers all bowed repeatedly to Meng Hao. The most bitter and regretful of all, of course, was the yellow-robed man. He glanced over at the violet-robed man to find him staring over with an expression of deep, venomous hatred. The yellow-robed man's eyes darkened, and he very nearly fell into a coma out of fright. Coughing lightly, Meng Hao sat down onto the crystal throne. The five men were now standing where he had been just moments ago. The old painter stared in frightened awe. The violet-robed man's heart was filled with anxiety and his scalp was numb. "Sir," he said. He was just now wrapping his mind around what had happened. His body trembled. Meng Hao looked at him and said, "I can see that you have some problems with your cultivation base. You've been stuck with only one Dao pillar for years. How about this? I have a medicinal pill that would be very beneficial." He lifted up his hand, in the middle of which was a medicinal pill. It was a very common pill for the foundation establishment stage. However, its effectiveness was a bit. "How many spirit stones are you willing to pay for it?" asked Meng Hao coolly. The violet-robed man gritted his teeth, then pulled out his bag of holding and handed it over to Meng Hao. Meng Hao frowned slightly, causing the trembling violet-robed man to turn and glare ferociously at the four men other behind him. Each and every one was shaking in their boots. One by one, they pulled out all of their belongings. In the end, the violet-robed man procured all of the items and wealth they had saved up over the years in their immortal's cave, as well as the cave itself, and offered it to Meng Hao, all in exchange for one medicinal pill. His expression the same as ever, Meng Hao collected up the various valuables. Then he glanced at the yellow-robed man, who looked back sullenly, and then the second brother Huang. "I heard you mention there's a teleportation portal here." Yes, there is," replied second brother Huang. Not daring to leave out any information, he quickly gave a full description. "Actually, we didn't bring the portal here. It's a natural function of the Immortal's Cave which we accidentally discovered. It works, but it will only teleport to one fixed location." His heart was filled with virtual agony as well as complete enmity for the yellow-robed man. "Damn it, fifth brother," he thought. "Who is this that you brought back with you? He's some kind of patriarch." Meng Hao nodded. He had already used his spiritual sense to confirm the location of the teleportation portal. Looking back at the five men, he suddenly waved his arm. Unable to resist, the five of them were instantly swept up. All they could see was a blur as they entered the world of the blood-colored mask which lay inside Meng Hao's bag of the cosmos. Everything was the color of blood. The meat jelly was in the midst of educating the Li clan patriarch, who sat there, emaciated, a blank, agonized look in his eyes. He looked more dead than alive, his body slack. The meat jelly immediately noticed Meng Hao appear with the five Huang clan men. Its eyes filled with excitement, and he instantly cast aside the Li clan patriarch. "Bullies," he cried, flying over. "I smell bullies. They're all bullies, all immoral." It flew a few circles around the five Huang clansmen, who were clearly disoriented and terrified. The meat jelly was getting more excited. Meng Hao cleared his throat and said, "Senior, these are the bullies I promised to bring you a few days ago. They need education from you to bring them back from the path of wickedness." "Excellent, excellent," said the meat jelly with a nod. "You kept your word, as shall I. First, let me count." It flapped its wings as it settled onto the shoulder of the large, violet-robed man. 1, 2, 3. The meat jelly began to count, starting with the violet-robed man and proceeding onto the second and third brothers. When its eyes fell upon the fourth brother, it suddenly stared in shock. 1, 2. It flapped its wings as it reached the yellow-robed man. Suddenly, an angry, humiliated expression appeared on its face. It spun and glared at Meng Hao. "Liar." Meng Hao gaped at the meat jelly. "Look," roared the meat jelly furiously. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. "You've brought me 2 bullies and I asked for 3. I wanted 3 bullies." It clearly believed itself to have been swindled. Meng Hao stared with wide eyes. Suddenly, everything became clear. This damned meat jelly really could only count the numbers 1, 2, and 3. Without hesitation, Meng Hao quickly swept up the yellow-robed man as well as the fourth brother. Instantly, they disappeared. "That was just a little mistake," said Meng Hao quickly. "Why don't you count again?" The meat jelly carefully began to count again. 1, 2, 3. "Haha, there are 3 bullies. Excellent, excellent." Excited once again, it beat its wings and flew around in a few more circles. Suddenly, a glow like lightning shot out from it toward Meng Hao. Meng Hao didn't evade. The lightning glow slammed into him, melding with his spiritual sense. "This is my will of lightning," said the meat jelly, which had already landed on the shoulder of the violet-robed man. You can use it to change forms one time. Make sure to bring back some more bullies." It looked at the violet-robed man with a friendly expression. "Hey, hello, my name is Ultimate Vexation. What's your name?" The large, violet-robed man stared in shock. Not waiting for him to reply, Meng Hao quickly left the blood-colored mask. He could only imagine what would happen after the man responded. A sea of suffering awaited him. Back in the Immortal's cave, Meng Hao sat there, a thoughtful expression on his face. The meat jelly can only count from 1 to 3. Very useful. After a moment he looked over at the old painter, who sat there with a dull expression on his face. "Senior," he said softly, "what village are you from? I can take you back home." The man looked scared. He hesitated for a moment, then said in a trembling voice, "But my painting isn't finished yet. Do you mind if I paint you?" His eyes shined with anticipation. Meng Hao was shocked for a moment. Then his eyes narrowed and he looked closely at the old man. No matter which way he looked at him, the man seemed mortal. After a while, Meng Hao nodded. "Thank you so much, sir," he said, continuing to sit there on the crystal throne. The old man took a deep breath and then lifted the paintbrush, hand trembling. Looking at Meng Hao, he began to paint. Time passed slowly. It took about 4 hours, during which time Meng Hao waited patiently. The man painted earnestly, and Meng Hao sat without moving. After a while, the old man put down his paintbrush. He eyed the painting in front of him, and a satisfied expression filled his eyes. He looked up at Meng Hao and smiled. "Finished," he said. "Why don't you take a look? Does it look like you?" His face was filled with anticipation. Meng Hao smiled. He stood up and walked over to stand next to the old man. What he saw on the canvas was a young man sitting upright in a chair, surrounded by mountains. You couldn't say that the painting wasn't good, but there was something about it that just didn't seem right. It only bore a 30% resemblance to Meng Hao. "Very good," said Meng Hao, smiling and nodding his head. "What are these 2 marks here?" He lifted his hand to point at the painting, where 2 long, thick marks could be seen. Meng Hao wasn't sure what they meant. "What's above all of us?" asked the old man, smiling. Meng Hao looked at him in surprise. Then he smiled. "The sky," he said quietly. "Think about it for a moment," said the old man, gazing at Meng Hao. His smile seems to contain some sort of hidden meaning. He looked completely different than he had just moments ago. Meng Hao thought for a moment and then looked up. His eyes glittered as his vision passed through the Immortal's cave to look up at the sky outside. After some time passed, Meng Hao lowered his head. The instant he did, his pupils constricted. The old man was nowhere to be seen. An archaic voice suddenly filled the Immortal's cave, causing Meng Hao's body to quiver. His spiritual sense suddenly scattered. "Because of the 10,000-year-old will of the World Tree, my residual self is here today. It is fate that I came here today to paint for you. I have sealed the true form of the Resurrection Lily, refined its nature talent, and fused it with your spirit. While it is sealed, it cannot harm you. Furthermore, you will be able to draw upon the Resurrection Lily's nature talent of plants and vegetation. When enough time passes, you can cast away my residual will which seals the flower. Every 10,000 years, I commit one person to memory. Furthermore, a person who exists in my memory cannot be exterminated by the karmic severing of those surnamed Jai." A long moment passed before Meng Hao took a deep breath. His eyes shone brightly as he turned once again to look at the painting. He gasped and stared in shock. The image on the painting was not that of Meng Hao, but of a resurrection lily. It looked savage, unwilling, and even insane. It appeared to be sealed inside the painting. The image was incredibly lifelike. There were also some words written on the painting. "The day the resurrection lily blooms with 7 colors, the flower falls, immortal ascension, 1,000 years. Karma is hidden in the immortal mountain. Ask not the heavens regarding the path to slaying the flower. Painted in the southern domain, planet South Heaven, for my young friend. Shui Dongliu. 1. Shui Dongliu was previously mentioned in Chapter 194 and Chapter 197. Chapter 209, Opportunity for a Secret Meeting. Meng Hao took a deep breath. He lifted his head and was lost in thought for some time. Within his mind swirled images from that day within the cloud vortex in the Song clan. When he'd stood on the enormous tree looking out into the emptiness, he'd seen words written and signed by Shui Dongliu. A long moment passed. Finally, Meng Hao sat down cross-legged on the ground to examine himself. After enough time passed for an incense stick to burn, he opened his eyes, which shone brightly. It was clear to him that the resurrection lily had been completely repressed by some intangible force. It seemed to be asleep, sealed. This effect was much more powerful than that of the spring and autumn tree, and would give him much more time to completely dispel the poison. Taking a deep breath, he carefully rolled up the painting, and then clasped hands and bowed deeply for the old man. "Many thanks for your assistance, elder," he said, holding his bow for the space of 10 breaths before straightening. He had no idea why this old man had appeared, or why he had been waiting, seemingly for Meng Hao himself. Shui Dongliu. After another moment, Meng Hao turned and headed to examine all of the secret rooms in the Immortal's cave. Everything that he could take with him, he packed away. Afterward, he went to the teleportation portal. Although he hadn't studied teleportation portals very much in the past, he had used them several times. He pulled out a spirit stone and placed it into the middle of the portal. Gleaming lights shined out, and soon, the glow of teleportation surrounded Meng Hao. A droning sound filled the air, shaking the entire mountain. The light flashed blindingly and then disappeared. Meng Hao also disappeared without a trace. Southern Domain, State of Eastern Emergence, Violet Fate Sect Territory. In the middle of the remote mountains was a towering peak, carved into which was an Immortal's cave. A radiant, glittering light appeared and then slowly vanished. Meng Hao immediately walked out. He looked back at the abandoned Immortal's cave and the rundown teleportation portal. Not sure whether he would need to use it again one day, he committed its location to memory, then disappeared into a beam of prismatic light. As he flew along, a rippling glow suddenly spread out in layers over his body. When it faded, his appearance had completely changed. His skin was no longer dark, but rather fair and clear. He looked much younger, perhaps 16 or 17 years old, and emanated a completely scholarly and refined air. He looked completely different, even somewhat soft and immature. "I bet all the sects and clans in the Southern Domain are looking for me, thanks to the Sublime Spirit Scripture incident. But now I can infiltrate the Violet Fate Sect, be it with the goal of dispelling my poison, learning alchemy, or to master violet chi from the East. I absolutely must join this great sect." His eyes filled with resolve. Several days later, outside the Violet Fate Sect, in a city of cultivators. Violet Moon was a flourishing, bustling city, a hub of activity for cultivators in the state of Eastern Emergence. This was especially true in the 7th month of the year, when the Violet Fate Sect held its yearly pill auction. During that time, the city usually was filled with even more cultivators than usual. It wasn't just the sects of the state of Eastern Emergence that would come, but sects from throughout the Southern Domain. Many would teleport here just to attend the pill auction. The so-called pill auction was a massive convention hosted by the Violet Fate Sect to auction off medicinal pills. Master alchemists from the Violet Fate Sect would offer up their best medicinal pills. Not only would they make tidy profits, but it allowed them to show off their pill-concocting talent to the rest of the world. During the pill auction, even the furnace lords of the Violet Fate Sect would sometimes participate. When that happened, it would always cause quite a stir and attract the attention of other great sects. After all, furnace lords from the Violet Fate Sect were different than normal master alchemists. Other sects wouldn't be able to raise up a single one, no matter how high of a price they paid. In the entire Southern Domain, only the Violet Fate Sect could train furnace lords. Half the reason the Violet Fate Sect could become one of the great sects of the Southern Domain was because of its alchemists. The other reason was the fragment of the Sublime Spirit Scripture, which gave them the violet chi from the East technique. Because of this, the Violet Fate Sect was structured into 2 divisions. One part of the sect was made up by the Violet Chi Division. The other part of the sect was made up of the East Pill Division. The Violet Chi Division practiced cultivation related to the Tao of magical techniques. The East Pill Division was devoted to the Tao of alchemy. The 2 divisions both complemented and respected each other. Because of this relationship, the Violet Fate Sect occupied its current position. This year's Violet Fate Sect pill auction would take place in only a few days, within Violet Moon City. Currently, a young scholar of about 16 to 17 years old stood in the public square in the city center, gazing off into the distance at a mountain. The mountain glowed with a violet light that rose up to the heavens. It turned the entire sky a violet color, and from a distance, it didn't appear to be a mountain but actually a colossal mountain-sized statue. The statue depicted an old man. In front of the old man was a pill furnace shaped somewhat like a mountain, as well as an enormous scroll, both of which emanated violet-colored light. With a mere glance, anyone could tell that this place was anything but ordinary. This was the main gate of the Violet Fate Sect. Next to the young scholar was a skinny, middle-aged man of about 30 years of age, with shifty eyes. He sighed emotionally and said, "That's the founder of the Violet Fate Sect. His Taoist name was Reverend Violet East. He's long since achieved immortality. However, the Taoist doctrines he left behind have been built upon down until this very day. They became the foundation upon which was built one of the 5 great sects of the southern domain, the Violet Fate sect. Eyes filled with veneration, he continued. Later generations remembered his countenance, and using a mountain as the base, carved out that statue. The pill furnace in front of him represents the East Pill division of the Violet Fate sect. The scroll represents the Violet Chi division. Together, they form the majestic main gate of the Violet Fate sect. Beyond that gate are endless mountains, all connected with suspension bridges. It forms an amazing sight that outsiders aren't able to gaze upon. That is the Violet Fate sect. The young scholar seemed to be completely wrapped up in the man's words. However, deep in his eyes existed a cold light. Naturally, this young scholar was none other than Meng Hao, with his new appearance. The skinny man next to him was a guide he'd found who helped strangers familiarize themselves with the city. If only I could join a great sect like this, then I would be able to live without regrets, Meng Hao said softly, gazing at the majestic main gate. His words were filled with longing. That's pretty much impossible, laughed the skinny man. The Violet Fate sect rarely recruits new disciples. Even when they do, it's usually only from the sects and cultivator clans within the state of Eastern Emergence. They almost never accept outsiders. If they did, the state of Eastern Emergence would be filled with people dreaming of joining. Young friend, it's still early. What sort of things are you interested in buying? I can take you to find them. There's no need, I already found what I was looking for. Meng Hao laughed, then took out a spirit stone and handed it to the skinny man. He gave him a slight bow and then walked out of the square. The skinny man stared at him in surprise for a moment, and then pocketed the spirit stone. He had led the young man around all morning, showing him all around the city but not taking him to any markets whatsoever. Putting the matter aside, he walked off. There was still a whole afternoon in which to find other customers. Meng Hao traversed the streets surrounding the public square. Halfway down one block, he suddenly stopped and glanced over at a nearby store. It was a medicinal pill shop. On the wall inside the shop, he could see some old, dried-up medicinal pills arranged to form the outline of a pill furnace. In the middle of the image of the pill furnace was an elliptical symbol. Within the symbol were 4 dried-up medicinal pills. Nothing about it looked out of the ordinary or unique. However, after catching sight of it, a smile broke out on Meng Hao's face. He walked around the corner into an alley. When he emerged, he was wearing a wide, bamboo hat and a long robe. He strode directly into the medicinal pill shop. The shop wasn't large. Other than the shopkeeper, there was no one else inside. I want one of these pills, said Meng Hao, pointing to one of the low-priced pills on the shelf. The shopkeeper opened his eyes and glanced at Meng Hao, then pulled out one of the pills Meng Hao had pointed to. This pill is useful during the 5th level of Qi condensation. It costs 17 spirit stones. Meng Hao grabbed the pill without even looking at it, and with the flick of a sleeve, sent it shooting toward the image on the wall. It immediately smashed into the middle of the elliptical symbol. Now, instead of 4 pills, there were 5. With that, he tossed some spirit stones to the shopkeeper and then left. The shopkeeper watched all of this in surprise. Then his eyes began to glitter, and he clasped hands and bowed toward Meng Hao's back as he walked off. Time passed. Meng Hao had been staying in Violet Moon City for 2 days. On the same day that the Violet Fate sect pill auction started, he was sitting there cross-legged in the night when suddenly he opened his eyes and retrieved a jade slip from his bag of holding. It was glowing brightly. This particular jade slip was an invitation medallion to a secret meeting. Recorded in the jade slip was a map, marked with the same symbol that was on the wall of the shop he'd visited earlier. Outside, the moon was rising. Meng Hao put away the jade slip and then left. Soon he appeared outside the same shop as before, wearing a wide bamboo hat and voluminous robes. Without hesitation, he walked up and knocked on the wooden door. After 3 knocks, the door slowly swung open. Inside was a nothing but pitch black. His eyes flickered. After a moment's examination, he walked in. Ripples flowed out across the surface of the blackness as if it were water. Meng Hao saw a bright glow, and then he was in a different place. Up ahead of him was a princely palace. This palace looked exactly the same as the place he had visited the first time he went to one of these secret meetings. The first secret meeting Meng Hao attended was in chapter 140. An old man, hands crossed and folded up within his sleeves, stood outside the palace. He looked Meng Hao over wordlessly. Meng Hao approached, pulling out the secret meeting invitation medallion. The old man lowered his head, and Meng Hao walked past him into the palace. He could hear the sounds of singing and dancing coming from further inside, just like the last time. Beyond some ornamental rock displays was a pavilion, within which sat 4 cultivators. All of them wore masks covering their faces, making it impossible to see who they were. This chapter was sponsored by fan from Wa, Melvin Smith, Anonymous, Quentin Niven, Atmasatriani Manon, and Cole Hosner. Chapter 210, Joining the Violet Fate Sect. Meng Hao stepped into the pavilion calmly. He didn't look at the 4 others, nor did they look at him. He sat down off to the side. Not much time passed before 3 more people arrived. They were surrounded by the sound of singing, and yet no dancers could be seen. It created a truly bizarre air. Suddenly, contented laughter rang out as a ruddy-faced old man appeared and strode toward them. He sat down in the seat of honor. Ladies and gentlemen, let today's secret meeting begin. I won't go into all the rules. I'm sure this is not your first time participating as guests in a secret meeting, fellow Taoists, so let's get going. He flicked his sleeve, and a 9 dragons furnace appeared in the middle of all the participants. Mist began to spread out, and Meng Hao glanced at the old man. This man was clearly not the same old man Meng Hao had seen at his first secret meeting. However, Meng Hao's cultivation base was not the same as it had been at that time. With his spiritual sense, he could tell that the old man wasn't even real. He was actually a projection. These secret meetings are really mysterious, Meng Hao thought. There must be some powerful forces behind the scenes that organize them. The meeting back in the Black Civ sect territory was exactly the same as this one. He pulled out a jade slip, which he sent into the furnace. All the other participants did the same, and soon the mist from the dragon furnace filled the area, enveloping everyone. Glowing lights began to appear, which Meng Hao started to browse through. His eyes began to flicker. The vast majority of the offerings were for pill formulas and medicinal plants. There must be at least one person from the East Pill Division here today, and not just a master alchemist but a furnace lord. In the past few days, Meng Hao had made a few inquiries about the East Pill Division, and now knew much more about it. For example, disciples of the East Pill Division started out as apprentice alchemists. Eventually, they could become master alchemists, then furnace lords. Higher than the furnace lords were the Violet Furnace Lords, who were very important figures within the southern domain. Violet Furnace Lords were automatically novitiates of Grandmaster Pill Demon, and thus could receive direct instruction from him. The only other way to become a novitiate of Grandmaster Pill Demon was to have special backing, and thus reach heaven in a single bound, so to speak. For example, Ding Xin from all those years ago had been a disciple of the Violet Qi Division. However, his gift for pill concoction impressed Grandmaster Pill Demon, and he eventually was selected to become a novitiate. Sadly, before he could even begin his studies, he had been sent to the state of Zhao and had fallen at the hands of Meng Hao. 1. Ding Xin made his appearance in Chapter 64 and was eventually killed in Chapter 67. After that, the only disciple Grandmaster Pill Demon had accepted to be a novitiate was Chu Yuyan. However, her skill in pill concocting was actually only at the level of a furnace lord. She was still quite a distance from Violet Furnace Lord. Meng Hao sat there thoughtfully, looking over the various twinkling dots of light. After a while, he reached out to grab the glowing dot that contained his information. He quickly imprinted it with some more details and then threw it back out to wait. Not too much time passed before a streak of light appeared in front of him. You have a friend who wants to join the Violet Fate Sect's East Pill Division and become an apprentice alchemist. You'll need a recommendation for that. What do you have to trade? Meng Hao's eyes glittered. This was the exact purpose for which he had chosen to attend the Violet Moon City secret meeting. According to the rules of the Violet Fate Sect, it was impossible to just randomly join the sect. However, the larger a sect is, the more dragons and snakes will be jumbled together. Of course, there would be some people who would break the rules out of self-interest. And apparently this secret meeting had a furnace lord in attendance, most likely because of the recent pill auction. If medicinal herbs could be sold for profit, then why not a spot in the sect for an apprentice alchemist? After all, in the Violet Fate Sect, there were roughly 100,000 apprentice alchemists. One spot didn't really count for anything. Meng Hao didn't respond immediately. He waited for about the time it takes 2 incense sticks to burn. No more responses to his request came in, so he began to negotiate with the person who had just messaged him. They felt each other out to confirm each other's legitimacy. Meng Hao was familiar with this process. It didn't take long for the two of them to reach an agreement. Meng Hao traded some of the medicinal plants he had acquired in Patriarch Reliance's Immortal's Cave in exchange for a spot as an apprentice alchemist. When the deal was completed, Meng Hao had a new jade slip in his hand. It was dark green, and the image of a pill furnace was carved on its surface. Soon the secret meeting came to an end. The mist dissipated, and one by one, the various participants disappeared into beams of light. When Meng Hao passed through the glowing exit, he found himself in a remote corner of Violet Moon City. He lowered his head and promptly disappeared into the night. 3 days later, at the foot of the Violet Fate sect, Meng Hao appeared, still looking like the 16 or 17-year-old scholar. He had a nervous expression on his face as he respectfully handed the dark green jade slip over to a stout middle-aged man. The man wore a Taoist robe and had a thin beard. He appeared to be at the 8th level of qi condensation. He glanced at Meng Hao and then looked over the jade slip. Since you have this jade slip of recommendation, you may join the Violet Fate sect as an apprentice alchemist. However, all apprentice alchemists must cross the pass of truth. Including yourself, there are 3 people here today who wish to join the sect. If any of you harbor sinister intentions, then you will meet your death on the bridge of truth. He flicked his sleeve and began to walk. Meng Hao followed him along the foot of the mountain, the one that was shaped like a pill furnace. Up above was the imposing statue of Reverend Violet East. Meng Hao and the middle-aged man walked for some time, until they were about halfway up the mountain. Up ahead was a chain bridge, which swayed lightly back and forth. Clouds drifted about above and below, making the image of Reverend Violet East just barely visible. Behind the giant statue was the peak of a mountain, surrounded by curling mists and clouds. Beneath the bridge was a deep abyss. Falling into the abyss meant sure death for anyone who couldn't use their cultivation base. Not far from the chain bridge stood a cultivator of about 30 years of age, with a blank expression on his face. Behind him were 2 youths, one boy and one girl, who cast nervous glances at the chain bridge. Clearly, they were so frightened that their scalps had gone numb. The stout cultivator led Meng Hao up to them and then yawned. "The 3 of you must cross the bridge," he said. "If no duplicity exists in your heart, then you will reach the other side safely. With that, you will be a Violet Fate sect apprentice alchemist. However, if you do harbor duplicity, then you will die. Throughout the years, many youths have perished before reaching the other side." Having finished his speech, the man completely ignored Meng Hao and the others. The expressionless cultivator closed his eyes. Meng Hao looked over at the chain bridge. Without hesitation, he walked forward toward it. Behind him, the young man gritted his teeth and followed. As soon as Meng Hao stepped foot onto the bridge, it began to sway back and forth. He took a deep breath as he walked away from the pill furnace mountain. About halfway, a strong wind picked up, whistling past and causing the bridge to sway even harder. At the same time, a soft sigh could be heard. The sound of it pierced into Meng Hao's ears and sent his mind reeling. Distracting thoughts suddenly filled his head. They contained information about the various reasons he wanted to join the Violet Fate sect. They bubbled up, beyond his control, as if at the moment anyone could read his thoughts. At this exact moment, however, the aura which powered the meat jelly's transformation ability suddenly rose up. It immediately pushed down the distracting thoughts. Suddenly, Meng Hao felt an invisible gaze descending upon him from the statue of Reverend Violet East, inspecting him. His heart trembled. As the other distracting thoughts were pushed down, he tried hard to continue thinking about his desire to study pill concocting as well as his yearning to join the Violet Fate sect. The invisible gaze swept over Meng Hao for the space of about 10 breaths. Then, it moved on to the 2 young people behind him. Meng Hao continued on, his face pale. Behind him, a scream rang out. Nothing had happened to the young woman, but the young man suddenly fell off of the chain bridge, plummeting down. Suddenly, the power of early foundation establishment erupted out from the young man. As soon as it did, though, his body suddenly trembled. A look of fear shone in his eyes as his cultivation base suddenly vanished. Like nothing more than a mortal, he fell down into the abyss. Meng Hao sucked in a deep breath. With an expression of both determination and fear, he continued on, clenching his jaw. The gaze swept over him a total of 9 times. Each time, it stayed on him longer and longer. Finally, he reached the statue of Reverend Violet East. He stepped onto the mountain that formed the main gate of the Violet Fate sect. He had succeeded. There in front of him was an old man wearing a black gown. A thick aroma of medicinal plants wafted off of him. He looked coolly at Meng Hao for a moment and then nodded. Generally speaking, people could not cross the bridge of truth if they harbored secret motives. The chain bridge seemed ordinary in nature. However, it was a method that the East Pill Division had used for years to test disciples. If they passed the test, then they could join the sect. "State your name." "Fang Mu," replied Meng Hao, nervously clasping his hands. 3. Fang Mu in Chinese is Chinese letter Fang Mu. Fang is a surname, although the character has multiple meanings, some of which are square in direction. Mu means wood or tree. "I'm the honor guard of the East Pill Division's herb district, Su Chen," said the old man coolly. "I also supervise new apprentice alchemists. You're lucky to be able to join the Violet Fate Sect's East Pill Division. Apprentice alchemists are the foundation of the East Pill Division. Every single furnace lord was promoted from the ranks of the master alchemists, who of course all start out as apprentice alchemists. In the future, perhaps you will become an esteemed furnace lord. That will depend on your good fortune and latent talent." The young woman finally approached from the bridge. She trembled as she stood next to Meng Hao. Her face was pale white. "Let's go. Having reached this point, you can now call this sect your home." The old man smiled kindly and then flicked his sleeve. A gentle wind picked up Meng Hao and the young woman as the old man flew off with them to another location. Winding paths snaked through the surrounding mountains as they flew along. Looking around, Meng Hao could only see endless chains of mountains, as well as countless valleys filled with richly ornamented buildings. The whole scene looked celestial in nature. "This place," thought Meng Hao, "is the sect where Fang Mu will reside for a very long time." His eyes shined brightly as he looked at all the sights. Then suddenly, a strange expression filled his eyes. He had just noticed that in one valley was an empty space between the buildings. Stabbed into the side of the mountain, there was an iron spear. That iron spear looked very familiar. This expression means that good and bad people will be mixed up together. Fang Mu in Chinese is Chinese letter Fang Mu. Fang is a surname, although the character has multiple meanings, some of which are square in direction. Mu means wood or tree. Chapter 211, A Despicable Name. Soon the old man brought Meng Hao and the young woman to their destination. It was a large mountain valley filled with buildings. Off in the distance were areas devoted to growing medicinal plants. As soon as they arrived, Meng Hao caught the fragrant aroma of medicinal herbs in the air. Many young people in the valley wore short, light yellow garments. Some picked medicinal plants while others studied jade slips in thought. Some sat beneath the evening sunshine, staring at medicinal plants in their hands, which swayed back and forth in a bizarre fashion. After landing, the old man flicked his sleeve and cried, "Bai Yunlai." The nearby young people looked up, their faces filling with respect as they saluted with clasped hands. An average-sized young man ran out of one of the buildings and approached them. He looked to be about 30 years of age. "Master Su, sir, I'm here," he said in a flattering tone. "What orders do you have? I can help with anything." The old man glared at him. "These are two new apprentice alchemists who just joined the sect. Explain things to them and then take them to get their medallions." With that, the old man turned to look at Meng Hao and the young woman. He nodded encouragingly, then transforming into a beam of light and shot away. Now that the old man was gone, the surrounding youths ignored Meng Hao and the others, continuing with their various activities. They showed no particular will toward Meng Hao, their expressions calm and even. Meng Hao had to get used to a sect like this. Life in the Reliance sect had been very different. This was his second sect. He sighed inwardly. The young woman next to him clasped hands toward Bai Yunlai and said, "Greetings, elder brother Bai." "Hey, no elders here and no need for saluting." Bai Yunlai laughed heartily, looking back and forth between Meng Hao and the young woman. "You two came just at the right time. Most apprentice alchemists are busy with the pill auction. Few remain. Don't worry, with old Bai here you'll get the hang of things quickly. Come, let's walk around and I'll introduce you to the place." After asking their names, Bai Yunlai led the way. The Violet Fate Sect's East Pill Division is vast. There are no fewer than 100 valleys like this one, each home to nearly 1,000 apprentice alchemists. We spend most of our time growing medicinal plants, memorizing their names, and harvesting them. Do you know who the most tired people in the entire southern domain are? Us Violet Fate Sect apprentice alchemists. 100,000 apprentice alchemists, each with their own work. We must participate in all activities. We memorize over 100,000 medicinal plant names, care for growing plants, and practice cultivation. Without cultivation, we can't catalyze plant growth. As for you two, you'll figure it out eventually. We apprentice alchemists are peons. Only if you distinguish yourself can you become a master alchemist and study true alchemy. Then inner sect disciples will seek you out to concoct pills. According to sect rules, they must provide compensation. It's a good day when that happens. Too bad there are 100,000 apprentice alchemists. How many do you think become master alchemists? There are only 1,000 in the entire sect. It's so difficult. Bai Yunlai spoke quickly as he led Meng Hao and the young woman through various valleys. See here, this is where only master alchemists can go. We aren't allowed in, they continued. This area belongs to the Violet Qi division, though it's outer sect, not inner. Bai Yunlai led them to one of the front valleys. Several cultivators of the Violet Qi division congregated there. Courteous expressions appeared on their faces when they saw Bai Yunlai. He was clearly an influential person within the sect. Meng Hao cleared his throat and said some flattering things to Bai Yunlai, who instantly looked happy. I know almost everything about the sect, and there aren't many things I can't handle. Junior brother Fang, if you ever have problems, just find me and I'll take care of it. Suddenly, Bai Yunlai stopped. He pointed up toward the valley center, where an iron spear was stabbed into the mountain. The spear was bent, rusted from exposure to wind and rain. Bai Yunlai looked around, then lowered his voice. Do you see that iron spear? There's a story behind it. A strange expression appeared on Meng Hao's face. He'd noticed this valley when they flew past earlier. He looked up at the spear, coughing slightly, feigning extreme interest. Do you know who put that spear there? It was Wu Dinkyu of the senior generation. 10 years ago, on a dark and stormy night, Elder Wu returned to the sect in a foul rage with that spear. He threw it with all his might, and it landed there. According to rumors from that year, he wanted all outer sect disciples to remember the shame. He said, "You fools are always stupid to the point of death. If you keep being this stupid, you really will die one day." Bai Yunlai's voice was quiet yet vivid. The young woman's eyes went wide as she listened. Meng Hao spontaneously gave another light cough. "Where did the spear come from?" asked the young woman. "Where did it come from? Heh heh. You might not believe it. According to the legend, 10 years ago, a group of outer sect disciples participated in an outer sect promotion test. It was held in an extremely dangerous location where they met a vile creature of a man. That guy ended up selling the iron spear to the two strongest of the disciples. The price ruined them. They borrowed spirit stones from fellow disciples to pay. They thought it was a precious treasure. It wasn't until a few years ago that they finally repaid all the spirit stones. When Wu Dinkyu heard what happened, he felt utterly humiliated. He was the leader of the group. What do you two think? Was that man despicable or what? 2. Meng Hao sold the spear to Xianxia and Lu Song in chapter 56. The young woman had been listening with wide eyes and gaping mouth. She looked up at the iron spear, which appeared completely normal. She couldn't understand why the two strongest disciples would waste so much money on it. Meng Hao felt a little guilty. When he noticed Bai Yunlai looking at him, he nodded solemnly. That fellow is definitely despicable. It's enough to make one's hair bristle with anger. After meeting Xianxia and Lu Song at the Song clan, he'd guessed the matter had affected them profoundly and continued to this day. What he never imagined was that it affected the entire Violet Fate sect. Suddenly, he felt sorry for Xianxia and Lu Song, and now understood why they'd gnashed their teeth with fury at the Song clan. Bai Yunlai sighed and shook his head. The spear reminds all Violet Fate outer sect disciples never to forget this matter. Who was the person who sold them the spear? Asked the young woman, her curiosity piqued. His name is Meng Hao, said Bai Yunlai quietly. Have you heard of him? Everyone in the southern domain has been talking about him recently. At the Song clan's search for a son-in-law, he revealed himself as the Sublime Spirit Scripture's successor. He was involved in that scandal with Chu Yuyan. Meng Hao, said the young woman, gaping. Quiet, said Bai Yunlai quickly. That name is taboo in the Violet Fate sect. No one dares to speak it aloud. Meng Hao stood off to the side, feeling even more guilty, and continued to clear his throat. He suddenly had the feeling that coming to the Violet Fate sect might not have been the best decision. At this moment, his expression suddenly flickered. A beam of light approached from the distance, transforming into a grim-faced young man who stared ferociously at Bai Yunlai. This was none other than Xianxia. Bai Yunlai, what are you doing sticking around here? Why haven't you moved on? Bai Yunlai suddenly shivered, his face becoming flattering. Elder brother Qian, I'm just showing these two apprentice alchemists around the sect. We were just leaving. With that, he grabbed Meng Hao and the young woman and hurriedly led them away. Did you see? That was one of the two who bought the spear that year. Never utter the name Meng Hao in front of him. He'll fly into a violent rage. He continued with earnest exhortation. Furthermore, if you ever leave the sect for training, be extremely careful if you run into Meng Hao. His deviousness knows no bounds. The wide-eyed young woman's face filled with disbelief. She quickly nodded, clearly placing the warning deep in her heart. Inside, Meng Hao laughed bitterly. Now he knew why they looked so wary at the Song clan when they heard his name, though he hadn't even recognized them. Remember, Bai Yunlai repeated, the name Meng Hao is taboo in our sect. Don't forget that. Okay, now we need to get your identity medallions and handle your living arrangements. The girl now clearly viewed Meng Hao as a fearsome tiger. Meng Hao could only laugh bitterly inside as Bai Yunlai led them away. Soon they arrived at a valley, which was relatively large and crowded. Since you've joined the Violet Fate sect, you're obviously from local cultivator clans. As you know, we all have limits to our cultivation bases. As apprentice alchemists, you must master the first technique of alchemy. Pay attention. This technique is called Violet Cloud Spirit. With this technique, you can feed a plant with your spiritual energy and catalyze its effectiveness, which is based on its medicinal age. Depending on your skill and the nature of your cultivation base, the catalyzation will produce different results. Several hundred people sat here cross-legged, looking at medicinal plants rocking back and forth in their hands. In front was a solemn, middle-aged man giving a lecture on an alchemic technique. He held up his hand, which contained a growing medicinal plant. In a blink, it grew 2 inches. Meng Hao looked around, focusing especially on the medicinal plant in the middle-aged man's hand. His eyes gleamed with a strange light. Bai Yunlai led them to the center of the valley, where an unimposing old man in a gray robe sat with eyes closed, appearing asleep. His cultivation base was impossible to gauge. Out of habit, Bai Yunlai walked over and retrieved 2 medallions and a bag of holding from the old man's side, pulling out 2 violet-colored jade slips which he handed to Meng Hao and the young woman. Give it a try, he said solemnly. The technique is simple. You should master it quickly. Then you'll try catalyzing for the first time. It's very important. It will reveal your alchemy aptitude and we must record the results. This chapter was sponsored by Colin Brinkman. Bai Yunlai's name in Chinese is Chinese letter. Bai Yunlai. Bai is a common surname which means white. Yun means cloud. Lai means come. Chapter 212, Nature Talent appears. The young woman, whose name was Chen Ling, seemed nervous when she heard what Bai Yunlai said. With an anxious, earnest expression, she examined the jade slip. Perhaps her latent talent was average. After looking at it for about 10 breaths, she reached out her hand, which began to glow with purple light. Bai Yunlai's eyes began to glow. Not bad, junior sister Chen. Okay, take out a medicinal plant seed. Chen Ling quickly opened her bag of holding and took out a seed. She placed it on her palm, her face serious as she catalyzed it. The violet chi in her hand grew denser until it seemed it couldn't grow stronger. The seed wriggled, then 3 leaves sprouted from it. Many surrounding onlookers noticed, then looked at Chen Ling. Her face grew red, and she was clearly excited as she looked at Bai Yunlai expectantly. To produce 3 leaves on your first try shows pretty good latent talent. Junior sister Chen Ling, according to my calculations, you have a 10% chance of becoming a master alchemist. He sighed emotionally, looking a bit jealous. Someone who could produce 3 leaves was uncommon among 100,000 apprentice alchemists. Bai Yunlai quickly recorded her results. After that, the voice of the man lecturing about alchemy techniques drifted over. He sounded calm and solemn. You will join District 2 Valley 13. His face was austere as he looked at her. In a low voice, Bai Yunlai explained, the 100,000 apprentice alchemists of the Eastern Pill Division are separated into Districts 1 to 4. Generally, only those with outstanding latent talent enter District 2. Junior sister Chen, go to Master Uncle Joe. Good fortune is with you today. Excited and nervous, Chen Ling immediately ran over. Junior brother Fang, it's your turn now, said Bai Yunlai with a sigh. He looked at Meng Hao. Meng Hao stood there thoughtfully for a moment. The technique described in the jade slip was simple, but the implementation was fantastic. Essentially, it catalyzed the medicinal age of plants and could be viewed as a force of nature. Only simple medicinal plants can be catalyzed with this technique, thought Meng Hao. Basically, you nourish plants with spiritual energy. Even so, this technique is extraordinary. I wonder how the Violet Fate sect prevents it from being stolen. He silently retrieved a medicinal plant seed from his bag of holding and placed it on his palm. After looking at it for a moment, he used the technique described in the jade slip to catalyze it. He had 2 core seeds, the first containing 5 perfect Tao pillars. Before arriving at the Violet Fate sect, he had used the Sublime Spirit scripture to form the second one. Currently, only the aura of his second core seed was visible to outsiders. Its power caused purple glow to appear on his hand, immediately apparent as thicker and brighter than Chen Ling's. Immediately the seed in Meng Hao's hand wriggled. It sprouted 1 leaf, 2 leaves, 3 leaves. In a blink it had sprouted 7 leaves. The purple glow in Meng Hao's hand grew blinding, filling the air. Instantly, all surrounding apprentice alchemists looked over, shocked, all eyes fixed on Meng Hao. The blinding rays of light were unthinkable, unbelievable. The man lecturing on alchemy techniques looked over wide-eyed, staring openly at Meng Hao. Next to him, Chen Ling stared in shock. As for Bai Yunlai, his jaw dropped, and he rubbed his eyes vigorously before staring in complete shock. Everything was quiet as all onlookers stared at the violet glow and the medicinal plant in Meng Hao's hand. He continued using the technique, falling into a strange state as if he'd turned into nature and the seed had become part of him. It was marvelous, and as Meng Hao immersed himself in it, the seed suddenly sprouted an eighth leaf, then a ninth. A cracking sound rang out as the seed continued to grow. Emerald green leaf sprouts grew larger, wrapping around Meng Hao's right arm. The white-haired, wrinkled old man who had been dozing behind Bai Yunlai opened his eyes. They glowed with ancient light as he looked at Meng Hao, filled with excitement. Meng Hao hadn't just caused new leaves to sprout, he'd grown an entire plant. Cracking sounds pulled him out of the bizarre state. His eyes flickered and he frowned. He hadn't intended to show off such talent. He'd been completely immersed in the strange state which had led his actions. He hesitated, his face pale. His cultivation base was dried up, and with the reduction in spiritual power, the medicinal plant began to slowly wither. Soon it died and fell off Meng Hao's arm. Panting, Meng Hao stepped back a few paces, eyes shining with confusion. Everything was deathly silent. Bai Yunlai couldn't understand what was going on. He'd been in the Violet Fate sect for years and had never seen someone perform such an astonishing feat the first time they practiced catalyzing. He looked at Meng Hao as if he weren't even human. All surrounding apprentice alchemists were completely shocked. What they just witnessed exceeded their imaginations. The middle-aged man panted as he looked at Meng Hao, his eyes shining with passion. Said Meng Hao, hesitating. He was a little scared, unsure of what he should say. At this moment, the old man behind Bai Yunlai stood up and walked forward to stand next to Meng Hao, reaching out to grab his wrist. His spiritual power burst out, flowing through Meng Hao's body, examining him. The power couldn't completely examine Meng Hao. Despite his suspicions, he could only see his second core C, which contained the power of the 6th level of Qi condensation. He couldn't see the core C's true color either, as it had been completely transformed by the meat jelly's frightening power. As far as he could see, everything was normal. Eventually, he released his grip. He picked up the withered medicinal plant and looked at it carefully for a moment, then returned his gaze to Meng Hao, his eyes now filled with the glow of praise. First-rate latent talent. You will join District 1 Valley 1. A wide smile covered the old man's face as he clasped Meng Hao's shoulder. Then he flew up into the sky, taking the withered medicinal plant with him. As he flew off, the entire valley broke out into a huge commotion. First-rate latent talent. No wonder his catalyzing is so astonishing. With latent talent like that, he's destined to become a master alchemist, which we haven't seen for years. Wow, I've heard of people having first-rate latent talent, but I've never heard of someone as inhuman as this. He catalyzed full plant growth. As the air filled with conversations, Bai Yunlai approached Meng Hao, eyes shining with excitement. "Junior brother Fang," he said, "make sure to watch out for yourself from now on. You have first-rate latent talent." "Could there have been a mistake?" asked Meng Hao, hesitating. "There's no way. Elder Wang tested you personally. How could he make a mistake? It seems he took that plant to show other elders. Haha, Junior brother Fang, you're going to be famous. Come, I'll take you to District 1 Valley 1. It's like a celestial paradise. I look in every time I pass it, but I've never been able to go in." He pulled Meng Hao along, leaving behind the commotion and shining eyes. The excitement continued to echo out even after they were gone. Time passed. Soon half a month had gone by. Meng Hao was now familiar with the East Pill division of the Violet Fate sect. Division 1 Valley 1 wasn't large, but was occupied by few people, clearly much fewer than other valleys. The scenery was enchanting. The mountains were lush, and a small mountain stream flowed down from above. Fish swam within its depths, visible from his house north of the stream. It was a small house with a courtyard. Within the courtyard was a small garden for growing medicinal plants. Currently, Meng Hao sat cross-legged in the courtyard, holding a scroll of bamboo slips filled with handwriting and pictures describing medicinal plants. Meng Hao sat all morning and into noon reading the scroll. Finally, he looked up, smelling the medicinal aroma in the air and listening to the gurgling stream. A light mist filled the area, causing the valley to seem celestial. perhaps somewhat exaggerated but undeniably an ideal place for cultivation. This was essentially the #1 valley for apprentice alchemists in the entire sect. Meng Hao found that including him, fewer than 50 people in the entire sect had the requisite latent talent to live here. Everyone had their own quarters where they could study, grow plants, and practice pill concocting. It was quiet, and Meng Hao felt at home. He was especially happy to read actual scrolls rather than jade slips. It reminded him of his scholar life in Yunji County. 100,000 medicinal plants, all different and organized into categories. Not only must I memorize them, I must remember their habits and characteristics, how to plant and harvest them, and how to store them. I must remember which plants cannot be mixed together, where and how to grow them, and the proper ratios when using them. Furthermore, it's not just the whole plant. The leaves, stems, and sap of various plants are all different. Splicing plants together creates countless variations. They talk about 100,000 plants, but when combined, it's more like 1,000,000. Meng Hao rubbed the bridge of his nose. For the past half-month, he had studied medicinal plant information every day. As an apprentice alchemist of the Violet Fate sect, he must remember all such information. Of course, there was simply so much that magically branding it onto the mind was essentially impossible. The only method was rote memorization. The more he memorized, the more prepared he would be. Forewarned is forearmed, so to speak. There was no trickery about it. Besides, Meng Hao didn't find it annoying. He was a born scholar after all, and this type of environment suited him quite well. There was no killing, no danger and treachery, no dealing with the wind and rain of the outside world. Meng Hao attempted not to think about the past, instead fully immersing himself in the role of Fang Mu. He was in the Violet Fate sect now, and intended to take advantage of the peace and quiet. As he examined all the information available to apprentice alchemists, his mind swirled with many images. Now he knew that this sort of knowledge was nature talent. Chapter 213, Violet Fate Celestial Land. Time flashed by, and soon 2 months had gone by. Meng Hao was now completely accustomed to life in the Violet Fate sect. Because of his first-rate latent talent, he had been able to enjoy some special perks, though not as amazing as others might have expected. In fact, during the 2 months, he didn't see the white-haired old man at all. Bai Yunlai, on the other hand, frequently came to visit. With his help, Meng Hao came to understand the Violet Fate sect quickly. There were lectures on alchemic techniques every day, which Meng Hao almost always attended. Amid hundreds of others, Meng Hao didn't stand out at all. Different senior members of the sect gave the lectures, rotating every few days. Everyone's understanding seemed slightly different. By listening to all of them, Meng Hao quickly developed a much deeper understanding of catalyzing techniques. In addition, for growing medicinal plants, the sect had a special area to distribute seeds, much like how the Reliance sect had distributed spirit stones. The purpose was to allow apprentice alchemists a chance to practice planting. The various lectures by senior members gave the whole place a very tranquil atmosphere. There was no fighting to the death. Meng Hao couldn't help but think the Reliance sect had been extremely different. This place seemed more like an institute of higher learning than a sect. Every month, there was a special sermon on medicinal scriptures. The officiators were always veteran master alchemists who had risen from apprentice ranks. Their pill-concocting skill was not shallow. Their lectures weren't limited to medicinal plants. They sometimes spoke of concoction techniques too. Meng Hao learned a lot after listening to a few such sermons. In addition to studying and planting medicinal plants, apprentice alchemists also had monthly catalyzing quotas. Every month, a certain amount of catalyzed plants had to be delivered to the sect. This was the life of an apprentice alchemist in the East Pill Division. Life was a never-ending cycle. Currently, Meng Hao sat amongst throngs of apprentice alchemists, listening to a middle-aged man discuss methods of distinguishing easily misidentified plants. Apprentice alchemists are involved in growing, catalyzing, and picking various plants and related tasks. Your purpose is to serve our sect's great alchemy system. The most direct way to serve is by assisting the nearly 1,000 master alchemists. Meng Hao sighed. Joining the Violet Fate sect was the right decision. In the entire southern domain, this is the only place where I can study true alchemy. Only the Violet Fate sect can produce true grandmasters of the Tao of alchemy. The Violet Fate sect's alchemy fame exceeds that of its other divisions. All sects and clans in the southern domain recognize this. Meng Hao sat there thoughtfully, his eyes shining with anticipation. If I want to have any contact with Grandmaster Pill Demon and get his help in dispelling my poison, then I have to be a disciple here. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with ambition. His true goal in joining the Violet Fate sect was to become a novitiate of Grandmaster Pill Demon and study the most powerful Tao of alchemy in the entire southern domain. Then he would create his own branch of alchemic arts. Afterward, any medicinal pills he needed, he could create himself, and not have to go through great pains to acquire by other means. He was lost in thought when suddenly, the sound of bells filled the air. It rang throughout all valleys of the East Pill Division, causing everyone to lift their heads immediately. Even the master alchemist giving the lecture stopped and looked up. Each and every apprentice alchemist in the Eastern Pill Division raised their heads. Their faces were filled with excitement. The furnace bells, Violet Fate Celestial Land Day has arrived. The last time was a year ago. I can't believe a whole year has already passed. Finally, we can go back into the celestial land. As the excited voices echoed out, the peal of bells continued to ring out. Meng Hao's eyes flashed as he looked up into the air, where suddenly appeared an illusory shape. It was an enormous violet-colored pill furnace floating in midair, imposing to the extreme, tens of thousands of meters in diameter. Next to it, dozens of beams of prismatic light shot up from nearby valleys to sit cross-legged around it, as if to guard it. At the same time, spell glows interlaced in the air, as if the entire area was being sealed. Radiant light filled the area, casting brilliant colors on the massive pill furnace and nearby cultivators. An archaic voice rumbled out, seemingly from nowhere. Apprentice alchemists, enter the celestial land. Harvest 9 mature leaves. The enormous pill furnace began to glow, and suddenly what appeared to be 100,000 strands of light snaked out and shot down. Meng Hao's apprentice alchemist identification medallion began to glow, as did all the other apprentice alchemists. The glowing strands and the medallion seemed to have some sort of connection. One of the glowing strands approached Meng Hao and fused into the medallion. A gentle power seemed to take hold of Meng Hao and pull him up into the air. From the 100 surrounding valleys, 100,000 apprentice alchemists all lifted up into the air, carried by the glowing strands. They transformed into beams of prismatic light that shot toward the gigantic pill furnace. The massive pill furnace seemed to be like a bottomless pit, which instantly swallowed them all up. Meng Hao's vision grew blurry for a moment. When it cleared, he gasped at what lay in front of him. The scene was difficult to comprehend, and his face showed complete and utter shock. In front of him stretched endless fields of medicinal plants. This place was a different world. There were no clouds in the sky. However, 9 suns could be seen. Next to each sun was a moon. This place had 9 suns and 9 moons. This incredible sky was the perfect place beneath which to grow medicinal plants. The whole world seemed to be under some sort of ceiling. As soon as Meng Hao appeared inside, an indescribable medicinal aroma washed over him. It was intoxicating. Most 100,000 apprentice alchemists had been here before. All were excited, but few were as shocked and moved as Meng Hao. Even more shocking to Meng Hao was the thousands of enormous, 300-meter-tall trees within the endless medicinal fields. And there were giants. These seemed to be remnants of an ancient past. They carefully strode through the fields, occasionally reaching down to plant seeds. In the sky were several hundred war chariots, which emitted an archaic aura. They were enormous and overlapped to form what almost looked like clouds casting shadows on certain areas. Further off in the distance, Meng Hao could see another type of tree that appeared 3,000 meters tall. Its trunk was violet, and its top was not dense with foliage, but rather an enormous, solitary eye. The eye was dozens of meters wide, looking around the area attentively. As Meng Hao looked more carefully, he saw a few hundred other trees like this one among the medicinal fields. Meng Hao wasn't sure when Bai Yunlai had appeared at his side. With an emotional sigh, he said, "The Violet Fate Celestial Land is a blessed land of the Violet Fate Sect's East Pill Division. According to legends, this place was once a celestial land of immortals. Reverend Violet East moved it here to create this endless medicinal garden. Some things grow here that are extinct in the outside world. Every so often, we're teleported here to harvest plants, giving us a chance to practice identifying them. This is the only place in the entire southern domain where you can see so many different types. They're virtually endless." Suddenly, a roaring sound filled the air along with the archaic voice. All conversations among the apprentice alchemists ceased. "You have 1 month to harvest at least 9 mature medicinal plants. You may only harvest plants you recognize and must be thoroughly familiar with their habits and characteristics. In 1 month, you will hand over your harvest and a jade slip describing your findings. This will be one of the evaluation criteria for promotion to Master Alchemist. Now, you may begin." As soon as the voice finished, The 100,000 apprentice alchemists took a collective breath and then scattered. Bai Yunlai didn't follow Meng Hao, instead going along his own meandering route toward another location. Meng Hao's eyes glittered with excitement. His recent days had been devoted to reading medicinal plant scrolls. He'd read several times about the 100,000 plant varieties, and though he hadn't memorized all of them, he knew quite a few. Now he could test his knowledge. His body flashed as he shot off into the distance. As the 100,000 apprentice alchemists scattered in all directions, above them, in one of the rotating moons, appeared 8 figures. "See that kid? That's Fang Mu, the one I tested 2 months ago with first-rate latent talent. First-rate latent talent is quite rare. We examined the withered plant you brought, and it's definitely not fake. Because of his latent talent, his spiritual energy is extremely suited to growing medicinal plants. He's just a seedling now. Let's see how many medicinal plants he manages to harvest. If he has a talent for identifying medicinal plants, then perhaps we should consider including him in the next promotion examination." As the figures within the moon engaged in their discussion, Meng Hao walked away from the groups of other apprentice alchemists, out into the fields of medicinal plants. He took each step prudently, being careful not to step on any seedlings. He kept his head lowered, looking around in all directions. "That spirit-shattering grass. I remember its description from the scrolls, but why does it have more foliage on the right side? Oh right, it's a hybrid. The right side is actually a resident sapling. This is Thunderbolt elegans leaf, shaped like a woman, swaying back and forth entrancingly. When used medicinally, it can be concocted into pills for the early foundation establishment stage." Meng Hao walked along, gradually identifying various plants and recalling all the information he'd read about them in the scrolls. The more he tried, the easier it became. A feeling of pleasure gradually filled his heart. This feeling was different than that of making a breakthrough in cultivation base. However, being able to master a branch of knowledge that had previously been elusive filled him with a sense of profound confidence. This was a cultivation of the self. From what Meng Hao could tell, his ability to identify all different medicinal plants was a type of nature talent. Meng Hao walked further and further away. Each time he saw a medicinal plant suitable for harvesting, he would immediately take it. At the same time, he would record a description and other information on the jade slip he had been given. He continued to corroborate what he'd studied recently, like a fish in water. He forgot about everything except the medicinal plants in front of him. His alchemy was advancing by leaps and bounds in this celestial land. Meanwhile, outside in the southern domain, the name Meng Hao had caused an enormous search to begin among the great sects and clans. In recent days, everyone was looking for him. Soon, Meng Hao's name came to be known to more and more cultivators. Of course, the Violet Fate sect was one of the sects participating in the search. However, no one had found even the slightest trace of Meng Hao. It was as if he had completely vanished. This chapter was sponsored by Blake Zbakowski. Chapter 214, We Finally Meet Again. No one could possibly know that the same Meng Hao who had stirred up such waves in the outside world was currently carefully looking over medicinal herbs in the Violet Fate sect's celestial land, an innocent student confirming his studies. Time passed, and Meng Hao lost track of how many plants he'd harvested. As long as he recognized a plant, it counted toward his quota, and he placed it in his bag of holding. At one point, Meng Hao found himself about 300 meters away from one of the giants. For some time, he observed how it planted seeds, moved seedlings, and cared for plants. Later, he stood beneath one of the Cyclops trees, watching the enormous eye gaze about. He even climbed one to harvest red grass growing on its trunk. Eventually, he was far, far away from where he had started. The fields of medicinal plants seemed to have no end. In Meng Hao's estimation, these more remote areas would most certainly have even more amazing medicinal plants, perhaps even some of the legendary extinct variety. However, everything was simply too big. Around him stretched never-ending fields of medicinal plants. As he proceeded, he started to realize that he actually only recognized about one medicinal plant out of 100. The Tao of alchemy is endless, he thought with a sigh. It's just as difficult as cultivation, a road without end, an almighty facet of heaven and earth. At first I thought that memorizing more than half of the 100,000 plants would be enough, but now I see that those 100,000 plants are simply the threshold. Stubbornness glinted in his eyes. This type of cultivation had nothing to do with his Tao pillars. His excitement became even stronger. "I'm a scholar at heart," he said, reassuring himself. Although my aspirations were never realized when it comes to studying, I definitely have an advantage over all the other apprentice alchemists. He would focus, do his best to remember everything he saw, and then go back to do more research in the ancient records. Time slipped by in this fashion. Soon, the sound of bells filled the celestial land. The month had passed quickly. Time was up, and Meng Hao wasn't content. He felt as if he'd just started. However, strands of light appeared in the air, and he sighed. He gave one last look at the celestial land before a strand of light whisked him away. When they reappeared in the various valleys, the 100,000 apprentice alchemists wore a variety of expressions. Meng Hao wasn't the only one to have grown during the month inside the celestial land. All of them had. Soon, people came to collect the medicinal plants they'd harvested, along with jade slips containing harvest information. Meng Hao chose not to secretly duplicate any of his spoils. He was fully devoted to his Violet Fate sect identity and wouldn't do anything that might give himself away. He handed over all the plants, then slowly headed back to the valley containing his house. Once back in his courtyard, he immediately took out some scrolls and began to study. When he found areas that he had overlooked before, his face would flash with excitement, and he would commit the information to memory. 2 more months passed. He had been in the Violet Fate sect for half a year. The search for Meng Hao in the outside world was slowing down. The various sects and clans had searched throughout the southern domain and still hadn't found a trace of Meng Hao. Various speculations circulated, but nothing conclusive could be determined. Meng Hao heard all about the situation from Bai Yunlai, who well deserved his reputation for being well informed about everything. He wasn't just familiar with the latest news about the Violet Fate sect. He kept himself informed about outside events as well. One morning, Meng Hao walked out of his house to sit in the courtyard. He lifted his right hand, which held a small, growing plant. His medicinal plant garden was filled with quite a few plants, all in full bloom, their aroma filling the air. Suddenly, his expression flickered and he looked up. Bai Yunlai raced along the meandering stream. Before he even arrived, he called out, "Junior brother Fang, there's an excellent opportunity. Your elder brother won a great opportunity for you." Meng Hao smiled. He waved his right hand and the medicinal plant disappeared. The courtyard door swung open just in time for Bai Yunlai to rush in. "What opportunity?" asked Meng Hao, smiling. Bai Yunlai's cultivation base was ordinary, only at the 7th or 8th level of qi condensation. However, he was viewed as indispensable within the sect. He often came to visit Meng Hao, and they spent quite a bit of time together. An inner sect disciple from the Violet Qi division requested alchemist Li Tao to concoct pills for him, gushed Bai Yunlai. Alchemist Li wanted me to arrange 2 apprentice alchemists to assist. I will go, of course. For the second spot, you were the first person I thought of. Quickly gather your things and come with me. This will be an excellent opportunity to expand your alchemy knowledge. Many apprentice alchemists would like to go, but Alchemist Li's personality is a bit eccentric. Just don't say anything and follow my lead. Meng Hao's eyes glittered. He'd learned that inner sect disciples from the Violet Qi division would often request master alchemists to concoct pills. Usually, the disciple would gather the necessary plants and spirit stones. If the master alchemist was pleased, work could begin. Furnace lords, who ranked above master alchemists, were well versed in the Tao of alchemy and had reached foundation establishment. There were only about 100 in the entire Violet Fate sect, each occupying a prominent position. Generally, inner sect disciples didn't qualify to request their services. Only conclave disciples and sect elders could. Violet Furnace lords could be considered virtually at the Grandmaster level. Each was a precious treasure of the sect, and all were pill demon novitiates. Only those with extremely high influence within the sect could request their services. Alchemist Li was naturally not a furnace lord, but one of the 1,000 master alchemists. Considering the arrangement and the scarcity of master alchemists, it was natural they would seek apprentice alchemists as assistants when concocting pills for Violet Qi division disciples. Meng Hao immediately rose to his feet. This really was a rare opportunity. He'd been in the sect more than half a year, and this was his first chance. After clasping hands and thanks to Bai Yunlai, they left. Soon, they arrived at the valley connecting the East Pill division with the Violet Qi division. Waiting somewhat impatiently was a man in a blue robe who appeared about 30 years of age. This was Alchemist Li. Standing next to him was another cultivator at the early foundation establishment stage. He was smilingly engaged in conversation with Alchemist Li, his demeanor extremely courteous. As they approached, Meng Hao's eyes glittered slightly. He recognized the cultivator next to Alchemist Li. It was Lu Song too. Lu Song is one of the two iron spear victims, haha. Meng Hao's expression was calm as they walked over. So, he thought, he's the one who wants the pills concocted. Alchemist Li frowned as he looked at them. Well, you're finally here. Bai Yunlai hurriedly moved forward to explain and offer subtle flattery. Alchemist Li's expression softened, and he flicked his sleeve. They all followed a very courteous Lu Song out of the valley. As they passed through several valleys within the Violet Qi division, Meng Hao examined the surroundings calmly. There were quite a few Violet Fate sect disciples to be seen. These were not disciples who cultivated the Tao of alchemy. When they saw Meng Hao and the others, respectful smiles filled their faces, and they clasped hands in greeting. Soon Lu Song led them to his immortal's cave, located halfway up one of the mountains. It had an excellent view, was quite spacious, and was excellently decorated. Once inside, Lu Song clasped hands and bowed to Alchemist Li. Brother Li, many thanks for your assistance, he said. This batch of medicinal pills will be very useful. With that, he produced a bag of holding which he offered to Alchemist Li. You're too kind, said Alchemist Li, nodding with a vague smile. Unfortunately, this is my first time concocting pills for someone, and I'm worried I might not be the most suitable choice. However, considering your insistence, I really couldn't refuse. He scanned the bag of holding quickly with spiritual sense, then tossed it to Bai Yunlai. Lu Song looked a little embarrassed. Inwardly, he cursed the master alchemists for their tricky thievery. If not invited out to concoct pills where they could be observed, they would usually secretly pilfer some. If they claimed success and returned some, so be it, but if they claimed complete failure, there would be no way to confirm their story. This often occurred in the sect. If I could concoct my own pills and the sect distributed them, I wouldn't have to deal with these alchemists. His face was covered with a smile. He bowed again, then glanced at Meng Hao and Bai Yunlai. They weren't at foundation establishment stage, but among apprentice alchemists were people who would one day become master alchemists. Meng Hao's face was calm, but inside he was laughing. If he showed his real face, Lu Song would surely go crazy. Instead, Lu Song stood there smiling politely. Alchemist Li laughed, knowing what Lu Song was thinking. He cleared his throat, then produced a pill furnace. Several crimson-colored spirit stones flew out and embedded themselves into the ground. The pill furnace floated in the air above them. Alchemist Li's face became somber. I looked over the pill formula. With my mastery of the Tao of alchemy, there's only a 40% chance I can successfully concoct the 6 harmonies pill. Watch carefully so that you don't suspect me of hiding anything should I fail. With that, his left hand pressed down onto the pill furnace. After a moment, it turned red and began to emit waves of heat. Take 6 blades of 7 sieve grass and extract the veins without breaking them. Approaching music flower petals, 7 of them with stamen attached. Catalyze if necessary. Red apricot leaf, maturity level 7 years, 7 months, 7 days. A deviation of more than 10 days is unacceptable. Alchemist Li's words came faster and faster. In one breath he spoke out 10 different medicinal plants. Bai Yunlai immediately opened the bag of holding, full of medicinal plants, and began producing the required ones. By the time he finished the approaching music flower, Meng Hao had already catalyzed the red apricot leaves with his left hand and extracted veins from the 7 sieve grass with his right hand. He handed them to Alchemist Li. Alchemist Li looked up at Meng Hao for a moment, then nodded slightly and began concocting. Occasionally he said the name of a plant he needed. Bai Yunlai sat there mutely for a moment. With a wry smile, he realized Fang Mu was Alchemist Li's assistant, whereas he had become Fang Mu's assistant. Whatever was required of Meng Hao, he produced almost instantly. Not only was he fast, he made no mistakes. Furthermore, when catalyzing, he barely needed to think before completing it with utmost accuracy. Alchemist Li continued to cast glances at Meng Hao, which turned into looks of shock. Very quickly, it seemed he was no longer looking down on Meng Hao, but viewing him as an equal. Even Lu Song noticed that when Alchemist Li spoke, Meng Hao would complete the task almost as soon as the words were out of his mouth. He took a deep breath. This assistant alchemist isn't even human. At this exact moment, a woman's voice echoed into the immortal's cave from outside. Lu Song, do you have any news about that thing I asked you to look into? As soon as Meng Hao heard the voice, the plant he was catalyzing suddenly trembled. Li Tao's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Li Tao. Li is a common surname, which also can mean strict or severe. Tao means great waves. Lu Song is one of the 2 iron spear victims, haha. Chapter 215, Lift Your Head. He only paused for a moment. It would be undetectable by anyone else. His expression didn't change in the slightest, and of course, he completed catalyzing the medicinal plant, which he then handed over to alchemist Li. He didn't look over as the woman entered the immortal's cave. She wore a white garment and was preeminently beautiful. Upon looking at her, any man would stare and be instantly infatuated. Her skin was so delicate it seemed a breath could damage it. She was tall and slender, with white, clear skin and luxurious hair that hung about her like a cloak. She gave off an otherworldly aura, and as she entered, a delicate fragrance filled the immortal's cave. Even alchemist Li started to breathe somewhat heavily, ignoring the pill furnace to watch her enter. Chu Yuan. Her brow was slightly furrowed, and though her face was as beautiful as ever, it contained a hint of unpleasantness. No veil could conceal the bitterness which caused her to sigh lightly, and no wind could disperse it. Only she could understand the pressure and the furtive glances that she had endured recently. After the events at the Song clan half a year previous, Meng Hao's name instantly spread throughout the entire southern domain. That, of course, caused her name to be mentioned. Add in the fact that Wang Tengfei had participated in the Song clan's search for a son-in-law, and the whole matter turned into a storm that had overwhelmed her. The engagement agreement between Chu Yuyan and Wang Tengfei instantly became a huge joke. All of it was because of Meng Hao. Chu Yuyan didn't hate Wang Tengfei. She could understand why Wang Tengfei didn't trust her and had chosen to participate in the Song clan's search for a son-in-law. She had picked the wrong person. Thankfully, they were only engaged and had not become official beloved. Nonetheless, Chu Yuyan couldn't help but sigh emotionally. Regardless of the circumstances, in the end, it had helped her to see what kind of person Wang Tengfei truly was. She could accept the end result. She didn't need Wang Tengfei to explain anything. After the events at the Song clan, she immediately sent the engagement agreement back to the Wang clan, putting an end to the childish arrangement. The person she truly hated was Meng Hao. It was a hatred that had seeped into her bones. However, at the same time, she continued to dream about the events within the volcano. It had turned into a pestering torment to her. "Greetings, elder sister Chu," said Lu Song hastily. Alchemist Li also greeted her with clasped hands. Bai Yunlai sucked in a breath and lowered his head in greeting. Meng Hao also offered her greetings, although inside he felt a bit remorseful. How could he not have a bit of a guilty conscience? In all truth, it was the same in regard to the matter with Lu Song and Caiyan Shuihan. However, of all the people in the Violet Fate sect, the person he least wanted to run into had Chu Yuyan. In his heart, Meng Hao felt that he had a bit excessive in the way he dealt with her. However, given the circumstances at that time, he hadn't had much of a choice. Furthermore, if Chu Yuyan hadn't chased him down and tried to kill him to begin with, then none of it would have happened. In any case, Meng Hao still felt bad. "I was planning to go look for you just after this," said Lu Song. "I made a lot of inquiries about that damned Meng Hao, but he seems to have disappeared into thin air." He couldn't help but grind his teeth when he said Meng Hao's name. There's not a single clue to be found about him. In fact, some of the sects have been watching the people he's made friends with, but in this entire half-year, he hasn't appeared. A lot of people think that that damned, despicable, wretched animal must have left the southern domain. He deserves to die by 1,000 knife cuts. Chu Yuyan frowned. During the past half-year, she had constantly sent people out to look for Meng Hao. Despite her insistence on tracking him down, he seemed to have thoroughly vanished. How could he have left the southern domain, thought Chu Yuyan. All his old sect members are here. Unless he provoked some calamitous, irreparable disaster, why would he leave? Actually, what happened in the Song clan was really a stroke of good fortune on his part. He could join any sect, hand over the sublime spirit scripture, and turn a dangerous situation into a position of safety. Meng Hao is bizarrely crafty. There's no way he would fail to realize that, is there? In my estimation, he is most certainly still in the southern domain. We just don't know where he's hiding if I ever find him. She gnashed her teeth. She was just about to turn and leave when her gaze fell upon Meng Hao. She stared at him and then suddenly spoke. Her voice was no longer warm but filled with coldness. "Lift your head." Meng Hao was astonished. "I've changed my appearance," he thought, "and yet she still focuses on me." Despite his astonishment, his face was blank and confused as he looked up at her. Chu Yuyan's brow furrowed. She wasn't sure why, but when she looked over this young man, her heart filled with an unexplainable irritation. Looking at him, though, she was sure she had never seen him before. Her eyes flickered as she thought, "Something's wrong. Why would I instantly be annoyed with someone for no apparent reason?" She studied Meng Hao for a moment longer to no avail. Meng Hao groaned inwardly. "How can this girl be so astute?" he thought. Despite his change in appearance and the other people present, she had somehow sensed something and come to focus on him. His heart suddenly began to race. Suddenly, he shifted his gaze to look at her chest and then deliberately gulped. A somewhat dirty expression flitted over his face, and he intentionally blushed. Now, he didn't look lecherous, but rather like a teenager seeing a beautiful woman for the first time. In such a situation, it would be a natural reaction to look so ill at ease. His expression caused Chu Yuyan's frown to deepen. A look of disgust appeared on her face, and she turned wordlessly to leave the immortal's cave, ignoring the feeling of irritation which had welled up within her. After Chu Yuyan left, everyone in the immortal's cave breathed a sigh of relief. Lu Song quickly sealed the main door, and alchemist Li shook his head. It was hard to tell what he was thinking, but after another sigh, he continued with the pill concoction. Elder sister Chu has sure changed a lot recently, murmured Bai Yunlai. She never used to be like this. Now she's completely cold and gloomy. I was shivering just now. It's all the fault of that Meng Hao, said Lu Song, grinding his teeth. That damned despicable wretch deserves to die by 1,000 knife cuts, 10,000 times. If I ever run into him, I'll tear him to pieces. I'll rip his flesh off the bone with my own teeth and grind his bones to pieces. The depth of his hatred was visibly apparent. After he finished speaking, he looked at Meng Hao with a strange expression in his eyes, then suddenly smiled good-naturedly and nodded. He had obviously noticed that Meng Hao was no ordinary apprentice alchemist, and there was no small chance that he would become a master alchemist in the future. Obviously, the sooner he made friends with him, the better. Meng Hao coughed dryly. He wasn't exactly thin-skinned. However, moments ago Lu Song had hatefully grinding his teeth and cursing, and with the next breath was beaming with goodwill. Meng Hao had the feeling that he would have to get used to such things. It took the entire day to finish concocting the pills. The moon was rising by the time the fragrant aroma wafted up from the pill furnace, and the medicinal pills that Lu Song needed emerged. Because it had a relatively hasty concoction, the medicinal plants which should have produced 7 or 8 pills ended up only producing 2. Meng Hao could easily tell that it had something to do with alchemist Li's technique. This was the first time he had participated in pill concoction. The entire time, he had observing alchemist Li's concocting techniques and had learned quite a bit. It seemed it would soon grow dark outside. Lu Song happily escorted them out of the immortal's cave and all the way back to the East Pill Division before clasping hands and leaving. In the following days, Meng Hao continued his studies regarding medicinal plants. However, because of the deep impression he'd left on alchemist Li, he had a new daily task. Whenever alchemist Li concocted pills, be it in his own immortal's cave or someone else's, he would always send for Meng Hao to be his assistant. Li Tao found that with Meng Hao at his side, pill concocting went much smoother. In addition, Li Tao would often give Meng Hao pointers regarding alchemy. Soon, Meng Hao no longer considered himself unfamiliar with alchemy. He was becoming more and more comfortable with it. The more he saw, the more he learned. He was steadily improving bit by bit. Dealing with others was not a complicated matter. For example, Meng Hao's relationship with both Bai Yunlai and alchemist Li was simple. It was all based on how they could help each other. If it weren't for Meng Hao's skill as an apprentice alchemist, Li Tao wouldn't have been so impressed with him, nor would he constantly seek him out as an assistant. The days passed like this for 3 months. Meng Hao was completely assimilated into life in the Violet Fate sect. In the time he had there, he had met a lot of people, and many people had come to know his name. Whenever he went out, he would run into familiar faces with whom he could chat and joke. Everything was very harmonious and peaceful. Everyone greeted him with clasped hands. Not a soul knew that this up-and-coming apprentice alchemist named Fang Mu was the person who so many months ago had caused a storm in the southern domain, Meng Hao. One day, Meng Hao found himself in Li Tao's immortal's cave, assisting in pill concocting. After the pill concocting was finished, Li Tao escorted Meng Hao to the mouth of his immortal's cave. Suddenly, he spoke. Fang Mu, I want you to know that to me, you are no apprentice alchemist. Your skill with medicinal plants places you in the rank of master alchemist as far as I'm concerned. Meng Hao stopped walking and looked at Li Tao. He clasped his hands and bowed. It was a completely sincere bow. Li Tao was at the early foundation establishment stage, but in the time they had spent together, Meng Hao had found him to be, not cold and haughty, but actually very approachable, even kind. Meng Hao's understanding of alchemy had significantly improved as a result of their relationship. In 1 month, continued Li Tao enthusiastically, there will be a promotion examination. I've made some inquiries and found that only one apprentice alchemist will be selected for promotion. If that happens and you are raised to master alchemist, then you will finally be able to learn the true Tao of alchemy of the Violet Fate sect. If you become a master alchemist, you will be assigned your own immortal's cave and your own furnace fire. You will no longer study medicinal plants, but pill concoction. The only frustrating thing, he continued sincerely, is that only people who have served as apprentice alchemists for 10 years can participate in the exam this time. If you're interested in participating, though, I'll see if I can apply to get you a spot. You think about it. Perhaps you can come up with your own method to join. If you manage to seize an opportunity like this, you might be able to save yourself 10 years of time. Meng Hao's heart began to thump, and he once again bowed to Li Tao. Many thanks, elder brother Li. They exchanged a few more words, whereupon Meng Hao bowed and took his leave. As he walked along the mountain paths, he looked up at the moon, and his eyes began to shine brightly. I can't spend 10 years as an apprentice alchemist, he thought. I must think of a way to seize this chance. My previous activities in the sect must have drawn a bit of attention. Continuing to ponder these matters, Meng Hao entered Division 1 Valley 1. As he walked into his courtyard, his heart trembled, although his expression stayed the same. After pushing open the gate, he found that standing there in the courtyard was a white-haired old man. He immediately caused a look of surprise to appear on his face. This was the same old man who had tested his latent talent the year he joined the East Pill Division. He was a furnace lord named Wang Fanaming. He stood there looking at Meng Hao's medicinal plant garden. As soon as Meng Hao entered the courtyard, he turned and gazed into Meng Hao's eyes. This chapter was sponsored by Dewi Suryono, Paul Vaneski, Kirin Tantanen, Christopher Choi, and CV. Wang Fanaming's name in Chinese is Chinese letter Wang Fan Ming. Wang is a common surname. Fan means ordinary. Ming means clear or bright. Chapter 216, The Meaning of Grandmaster. The instant the old man turned and looked at Meng Hao, his eyes filled with a bright light, and he said, "You joined the East Pill Division with a recommendation medallion from a furnace lord. What is your purpose here?" A mysterious pressure locked onto Meng Hao's body. As the man spoke the words, he took a step forward. When the step fell, ghost images vibrated up everywhere, as if the area had cut off from the rest of the world. Such a scene gave the feeling that any escape was impossible. Even while his first words were still echoing out, he spoke again. "I've thoroughly investigated all of the cultivators with the surname Fang in the entire state of Eastern Emergence. I couldn't find any record of you anywhere. As an alien in the state of Eastern Emergence, tell me, why are you here?" It was obviously supposed to feel like an interrogation. Add in the display of power, and it seemed as if dark storm clouds were rolling Meng Hao's way. Inside, Meng Hao was calm. However, his face visibly paled and he stood in place, body trembling slightly. His chin, though, was set stubbornly. "State your real name and reveal your purpose here. This is your last chance. If you refuse to come to your senses, then don't blame me for being ruthless." The old man took another step forward. When the step fell, the sound of rumbling thunder filled the courtyard. A fierce wind sprang up and waves of pressure rolled out. The medicinal plants in the garden seemed as if they were being harmfully catalyzed. They were growing dark and ugly. Meng Hao's face grew paler. However, inwardly he was as calm as ever. This old man's cultivation base was at the core formation stage, and his words seemed cold and merciless. In reality, though, he was obviously bluffing. Considering Meng Hao's path of cultivation and the level of his experience and training, how could he not tell? He had already been in the Violet Fate sect for the better part of a year. After all this time, the fact the old man chose today to come visit was telling. Meng Hao only had to think a moment to come to a fairly certain conclusion. Obviously, the promotion day was approaching, and although Meng Hao didn't qualify to participate, his first-rate latent talent had attracted quite a bit of attention in the East Pill Division. That was the whole purpose of this whole scene. The display of power was basically a warning of sorts. All of these thoughts flitted through Meng Hao's mind in an instant. He also thought about how he had crossed the chain bridge to enter the sect, and his heart grew even calmer. He took a deep breath, and continuing to keep his face pale, clasped his hands and bowed deeply to the old man. His expression bitter, his voice light, he said, "Sir, my name really is Fang Mu, and I am not from the state of Eastern Emergence. I have long yearned for the Tao of alchemy, and that is why I thirsted to join the Violet Fate sect. I have no other purpose. I wholeheartedly wish to study alchemy. Unfortunately, the Violet Fate sect does not accept outsiders, so I had to figure out another way to get the recommendation medallion from a furnace lord. In order to enter the sect, I had no choice other than to use subterfuge. I had no option, sir. If you believe Junior is in error, then I will accept any punishment the sect deems fit. Meng Hao bowed down and held the bow, not lifting himself up straight. Everything was quiet. The old man looked at Meng Hao. He had long since investigated Meng Hao and knew there were some things about him that weren't quite right. However, there were 100,000 apprentice alchemists in the sect. More than a few of them had things about them that weren't quite right. The fact that they had passed the Bridge of Truth, however, was evidence that they harbored no ill intent toward the East Pill Division. If they did have any such secrets, they would not be able to pass the bridge. If Meng Hao was an ordinary apprentice alchemist without first-rate latent talent, then the old man wouldn't have paid him the least bit of attention, and things would have run their course naturally. However, Meng Hao's latent talent had attracted not just the attention of this old man, but other furnace lords in the East Pill Division. When the question came up regarding his qualifications to participate in the promotion examination, he went against convention to acquire a spot for Meng Hao, which therefore led to the current scene. Wang Fanming was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Meng Hao and coolly said, "Once you join the Eastern Pill Division, you may never forsake it, not for the rest of your life. Can you do so?" Meng Hao finally stood up straight. Looking at the old man with determination in his face, he spoke in a voice that could chop nails and sever iron. "It is a great kindness on the part of the sect to teach me about the Tao of alchemy. As long as the sect doesn't kick me away, I will never forsake it." Actually, after living in the Violet Fate sect for the better part of a year, being part of the East Pill Division, and studying alchemy, Meng Hao really had developed this view. As long as he could stay here and study alchemy, he would not leave the sect. The old man gave Meng Hao a deep look. "I don't care about your background. If you say you're Fang Mu, then you are Fang Mu. However, if you ever betray the sect, I will take away your Tao of alchemy. If I am unable to, there will be another alchemist in the East Pill Division who can." He flicked his sleeve, and a medallion shot toward Meng Hao. It landed in Meng Hao's hand, glowing mysteriously, radiating coldness. "In 1 month, you may attend the examination for promotion to Master Alchemist. Only one candidate will be selected. Whether or not you are selected will depend on your luck." With that, Wang Fanming turned and flew away, disappearing in the blink of an eye. As he said, he didn't care about Meng Hao's background. There were many people in the Violet Fate sect who had mysterious backgrounds. Even among the Furnace Lords were people who had previously been members of other sects, or who had enemies in the outside world and joined the East Pill Division to hide. Actually, Wang Fanming himself was not from the state of Eastern emergence. It was only because of various circumstances that he ended up becoming a cultivator of the East Pill Division. This was the tradition within the East Pill Division, a tradition created by someone who commanded high prestige and universal respect in the Violet Fate sect, Grandmaster Pill Demon. Grandmaster Pill Demon had uttered the following words regarding the East Pill Division. "One must take the long view when traversing the great path of the Tao of alchemy. Any qualified alchemist may become a cultivator of the East Pill Division. The only requirement is that he harbor no ill intentions, nor have the reckless ambition of wild wolves." Because of this, the traditions of the East Pill Division of the Violet Fate sect had existed for a very long time. Unfortunately, it had also led to circumstances in which disciples forsook the sect. Despite that, the techniques of the East Pill Division had never been revealed. Many outsiders wondered about this mystery, and also why those who forsook the sect were so sentimental about it afterward. In actuality, from time immemorial, all disciples who forsook the sect were eventually brought back, except for 2. Those 2 had rocked the southern domain, and were the only 2 people other than Pill Demon to become Grandmasters of the Tao of Alchemy. Both of them had once been novitiates of Grandmaster Pill Demon. Eventually, they brought forth new ideas and innovations. Regardless of what outsiders thought, these 2 never believed their skill could outmatch that of their master. The reason they had become famous, and the reason they never returned to the sect, was also because of the words of Grandmaster Pill Demon, words that continued to be passed down to this very day. Along the path of the Tao of alchemy, if 100 flowers bloom, who has the right to permit only the mutant peony to exist? Cannot the lesser peony and the orchid also coexist? Thus is birthed the flower garden. If the medicinal plant garden only contained one medicinal plant, how could the Tao of alchemy come into being? 1. The mutant peony referred to here is the peony which once was the national flower of China. It is also called the king of flowers. What I'm translating as the lesser peony is another type of peony flower that resembles the mutant peon. These 2 are sometimes contrasted. For example, in the ancient court, the empress would be the mutant peony, and the concubines would be the lesser peonies. If those who inherit my Tao of alchemy are full of the ambitions of wild wolves, I will take back the Tao of alchemy. However, he who can weed through the old to bring forth the new, he who can tread the untrodden path, that person may establish his own school of thought. If he is able to bear the weight of the title Grandmaster, then it has nothing to do with me. In that case, there is no need to discuss returning to me. Because of this, there are 3 alchemists called Grandmaster. In reality, though, the Tao of alchemy in the southern domain has only one true Grandmaster. Pill Demon. Meng Hao watched Wang Fanaming leave, and his eyes shone with a mysterious light. He never thought he would be able to secure a spot in the promotion examination so quickly. He looked down thoughtfully at the jade slip he held in his hand. His eyes glinted, and he cast spiritual sense into it. His mind suddenly shook. In his head suddenly appeared the words, Alchemy Scripture. He sat down cross-legged in the courtyard, holding the jade slip in hand. He closed his eyes and immersed himself in the alchemy scripture which had appeared in his head. It wasn't until the sun began to rise the following morning that he slowly opened his eyes. He took a deep breath and looked off at the distant mountain peaks. His eyes were filled with reverence. He sat there quietly for a long time. This so-called alchemy scripture was in fact not really a scripture. Actually, it was a record of events which had occurred in the East Pill Division in the 1,000 years since Grandmaster Pill Demon rose to fame. There were many stories recorded, for example the origins of the 2 other Grandmaster alchemists of the Southern Domain, as well as various quotations from Grandmaster Pill Demon. After examining the entire alchemy scripture, an image appeared in his mind of a figure standing at the peak of the Tao of alchemy. Now he understood why Wang Fanaming was so quick to discard the issue of his hidden past. Meng Hao slowly put away the jade slip. He took a few deep breaths and then began his daily apprentice alchemist cultivation. Time went by slowly. Soon, a month had passed. The news about the examination for apprentice alchemists with 10 years of experience spread like wildfire throughout the East Pill Division. It quickly became the only conversation topic among the apprentice alchemists. Roughly 80% of the apprentice alchemists had 10 or more years of experience. However, not all would participate in the promotion examination. Only 30,000 slots were available for registration. When the day of the test came, the entire East Pill Division bustled with noise and excitement. The furnace bells rang out, and an enormous pill furnace once again appeared up in the air. Tens of thousands of strands of light reached out toward the qualified apprentice alchemists, who were all bursting with excitement. Meng Hao was among them as they shot toward the pill furnace. In the blink of an eye, 30,000 people vanished. When they reappeared, it was not in the celestial land of medicinal plant fields. Instead, they were in an enormous public square paved with limestone. In the middle of the square was a gigantic blue-green pill furnace. Medicinal aroma wafted out from it, filling the square with medicinal mists and clouds. Arranged in the enormous square were 30,000 worktables. On the surface of each worktable was a black jade slip. As the 30,000 participants arrived, there was no hubbub or racket. They all looked nervously toward the pill furnace, which was surrounded by 8 old men, sitting cross-legged. One of them was Wang Fanaming. The crowd of people looked down at the 8 men, who slowly opened their eyes. They looked over everyone with kind, gentle expressions. In the promotion exam of the East Pill Division, one person shall be selected from your midst to practice the cultivation of the Tao of alchemy. The examination consists of 2 rounds. The first round is an elimination round which only 10 participants will pass. The second round is the final round, from which one master alchemist will emerge. 100,000 medicinal plants, 1 million variations. Your task is to silently list them out. Write down as many as you can think of. In front of you are 30,000 workstations. Please organize yourselves among them and prepare to begin. Chapter 217, Struggling for Plant Mastery. All 30,000 apprentice alchemists were respectful and solemn. Quite a few had full heads of white hair. Other than Meng Hao, not a one appeared to be under 30 years of age. They had all been apprentices for at least 10 years and had deep, profound understanding of medicinal plants. Practice had ingrained the knowledge so deeply that if they left the sect for another on the outside, they would be rated as a medicinal plant grandmaster. Right now, they solemnly filed forward toward the workstations. Meng Hao took a deep breath as he looked around at the workstations, selected one, and sat down. This was his first time participating in an examination for promotion from apprentice alchemist. However, the feeling was not strange to him. Actually, everything felt quite familiar. The scene around him was very much like the examinations he had taken part in back when he was a scholar in the state of Zhao. He had participated in the preliminary rounds of the imperial examinations on multiple occasions, and although he had never scored top marks, he was still very familiar with the process. Meng Hao chuckled to himself. There really are a lot of similarities between the two. This Master Alchemist promotion examination tests your knowledge of medicinal plants. The more plants you remember, the more details you recall, and the more accurately you do so, will determine how close to perfection your final score is. It's not very different at all from the imperial examinations. He felt like he was back in the imperial examination hall. Except this time, he was not aiming for a scholarly rank, but promotion in the Tao of Alchemy. He took another deep breath and looked around at all the apprentice alchemists as they peered down at the jade slip in front of them. Suddenly, magical glowing screens appeared in front of them, upon which could be seen various medicinal plants. The task of all the apprentice alchemists was to identify the plants they recognized, and then record their habits and characteristics, planting requirements, harvesting methods, and any other details. Seeing that many of the participants had already started, Meng Hao tapped his jade slip, and immediately a magical screen appeared. He stared thoughtfully at the medicinal plant which appeared, and then began to record the name of the plant, its characteristics, and some other details. Time passed. The square was quiet and peaceful. The 8 old men who sat cross-legged by the pill furnace appeared to Meng Hao to be the test administrators. They looked around the examination square. Clearly, if anyone caused a disturbance, severe punishment would follow. Meng Hao soon fell into a rhythm of answering the questions. He quickly recorded the information about the plants that appeared in front of him. Many of them he had seen with his own eyes in the celestial land. Others he had even held in his own hands when assisting Li Tao in pill concoction. 6 hours quickly passed. Meng Hao was immersed in filling out his answers. His eyes shone with determination. He had discovered that this was an excellent method to verify how much he had learned. All of the information he had studied about medicinal plants during the better part of the year once again floated up in his mind. As he reached down into the depths of his memory, he began to experience the same feeling he had as a scholar all those years ago, the joy that can be found in the midst of hardship. Soon it became apparent that some of the surrounding apprentice alchemists were wearing out. Some frowned, obviously racking their brains for answers. More time went by, another 4 hours. Some of the apprentice alchemists were pale-faced. Many were clearly encountering unfamiliar medicinal plants, which they would skip past quickly. However, soon, they discovered that the unfamiliar plants became more and more frequent. Eventually, people began to abandon their struggles and bitterly leave the examination field. They moved off to the side to observe. Within a short time, more and more apprentice alchemists began to stare bitterly at the screens in front of them. They would stare blankly for a while, then stand and walk off to the side, heaving bitter sighs. Despite 10 or more years of experience, many of these people had difficulty remembering so many medicinal plants. After all, there were 100,000 of them, with 1,000,000 variations. If one's cultivation base was high enough, divine sense could be used to brand the information in one's mind. Without that ability, though, the only other method was rote memorization, which was incredibly difficult. Meng Hao, of course, was by nature a scholar and an intellectual. From the moment he had begun to tread the path of a scholar, each and every day had devoted to memorizing things. His expression was calm, and his gaze was locked onto the screen in front of him. He zoned out everything else, focusing completely on the ever-changing medicinal plants. The more questions he answered, the happier he grew. His movements were like floating clouds in flowing water, natural and spontaneous. Soon, he began to attract the attention of some of the people who had given up and were now observing the proceedings. More time passed. The examination had now been underway for 20 hours. Of the original 30,000 participants, only 20,000 continued to fill in answers. The surroundings were as quiet as ever. Those who had abandoned their efforts did not leave. They stood by quietly, watching on. By the time the 30th hour arrived, only 70% of the 20,000 participants remained. The eyes of these more than 10,000 apprentice alchemists were bloodshot. Each and every one doggedly stared at their respective glowing screens, continuing to fill in information from their studies. Meng Hao was as calm as ever. The speed with which he answered the questions caused Wang Fanaming and the other old men to cast sidelong glances at each other. By the 40th hour, only 30% or so of the participants had not given up. By the 60th hour, only 6,000 remained in the square, continuing on madly with the examination. Already, quite a few were obviously about to give up. If they looked around, they would see that their compatriots were madly going all out, jaws clenched as they pondered the images of the medicinal plants in front of them, attempting to recall their habits and characteristics. By the time 80 continuous hours of testing had passed, only 3,000 participants remained. They had answering questions for 4 days and 4 nights with no rest whatsoever. They were like mad devils who could remember everything. When the 100th hour arrived, an older man who appeared to be about 50 years old coughed up a mouthful of blood and then collapsed to the ground. His previously gray hair was now completely white. The scene caused quite a commotion, and quite a few of the surrounding apprentice alchemists immediately stood pale-faced and gave up. They knew that if they continued, they may very well die here this day. They walked off to the side, supported by fellow apprentice alchemists. Everyone was now watching the remaining 1,000 test-takers, their eyes filled with fear and dread. They knew full well how fearsome these people were. Only incredibly extraordinary individuals could remember so many of the 100,000 plants and 1,000,000 variations. Meng Hao took a deep breath. His eyes felt gritty, so he closed them for a moment to rest. Then he opened them, focusing on the medicinal plants and continuing to fill out answers. Time passed by in a blur. The number of people who remained answering questions grew smaller and smaller. 1,000, 800, 500, 300. By the time 180 hours had passed, only 11 people remained. The 11 people all sat in different locations within the enormous square, competing with unbridled frenzy. Meng Hao was frowning. Some of the plants in front of him required a careful search of his memory to recall. This was especially true of the medicinal plants that were easily misidentified. These could only be correctly identified by carefully examining various tiny details. In fact, in some cases, they could only be distinguished by taste. Unfortunately, only images were available, which meant that even further examination was required before any information could be recorded. The other 10 people all were pale-faced, and their eyes radiated with ferocity. Having endured all the way down to this point, they obviously were not willing to give up. This test was a trial by fire, and an unforgiving one at that. Only 10 mistakes or oversights were allowed, and then instant disqualification. In this test, no one could masquerade as having ability. The best among the apprentice alchemists would be visible in a single glance. Suddenly, one of the final 11 suddenly grew white as death. His expression changed as the screen in front of him suddenly disappeared. He stared mutely for a long moment, then staggered to his feet and laughed bitterly. A fellow apprentice alchemist held him by the arm as he left his workstation. The observing apprentice alchemists began to breathe heavily. There were now only 10 participants left. These 10 had already passed into the second round of the examination. However, not a single one stood up. Despite being assured a pass to the next round, all of these apprentice alchemists aspired to be master alchemists. Being so ambitious and proud, they possessed the spirit of competition. They naturally wanted to see who would be the first among them all. Each and every one of them possessed the same mentality. All of the surrounding 30,000 apprentice alchemists were watching on with rapt attention. They were all wondering in the end, who would place first. Wang Fanaming and the 7 other old men watched on wordlessly. They said nothing to end the examination, and instead watched on quietly. Time passed by. These 10 people, including Meng Hao, were all well-known figures amongst the apprentice alchemists. All of them were clearly qualified to become master alchemists. Their eyes were completely bloodshot as they stared at the screens in front of them. None gave up. Meng Hao closed his eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. When he opened them, he found himself looking at a very rare medicinal plant. In fact, this was a plant that was not among the 100,000 medicinal plants, but rather a hybrid grass that was one of the 1,000,000 variations. Even those cultivators in the southern domain who considered themselves experienced and knowledgeable would only be able to stare in frustration at such a plant. It's getting harder and harder, thought Meng Hao, sighing deeply, but that only makes things more interesting. His face radiated stubbornness. As of now, the aura of a cultivator had grown faint around him, to be replaced by the implacability of a scholar. This was the stubbornness of someone who had repeatedly failed in the imperial examinations and yet continued to participate. After joining the East Pill Division, Meng Hao realized that he really was innately inclined to practice alchemy. Perhaps in terms of cultivation, his latent talent was not extraordinary. But when it came to alchemy, however, he possessed true genius. Whether it was memorizing medicinal plants or catalyzing them, he stood head and shoulders above all others. In fact, you could say that this was not innate talent, this was nature talent. Nature talent regarding all plants and vegetation. Meng Hao suddenly recalled the words of Shui Dongliu 1. Shui Dongliu's words as referenced here are from only a few chapters ago, chapter 208 to be specific. Gradually, he came to realize that he didn't always have nature talent. This nature talent came from the resurrection lily. Meng Hao wasn't sure how much time had passed. Soon, one screen after another went dark among the final 10. They had clearly made more than 10 mistakes and were out. Soon the hour arrived in which only 2 people remained. One was Meng Hao, the other was a grim-faced, middle-aged man. As they continued with the examination, the middle-aged man would look up from time to time at Meng Hao. His eyes slowly filled with crazed determination. This chapter was sponsored by Blake Zbakowski.